Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nolan Buchanan. California is known for its beautiful natural attractions, particularly in El Dorado County, which borders Nevada and is close to the well-known Lake Tahoe. In this rural region lies the small town of Greenwood, home to over 1,000 residents. Tourism is one of the main economic sectors here. On the morning of Sunday, September 13, 2015, everything seemed normal until an urgent call to 911 reported a large fire in the forest area. Immediate action was necessary to prevent the fire from spreading. Firefighters quickly arrived at the scene and began extinguishing the fire, but the flames rapidly surged to heights of 33 feet. Fortunately, there was a stream nearby that helped extinguish most of the fire. The next step was to check the area to ensure that no one was injured and to assess the damage. During the survey, it was found that a small building measuring about 55 square meters had completely burned down, with only the foundation remaining. What caught the firefighters' attention was a strange smell that was later identified as the smell of burning flesh. Initially, the firefighters considered the possibility that a pet might have been trapped inside the house, but they quickly ruled this out when they found a human skull and a burnt rib cage. Sadly, it became clear that the fire had claimed someone's life. The grim discovery was promptly reported to the police, who faced a challenge. Parts of the house were still on fire, making it impossible to conduct a thorough examination. They had to wait until the fire was out and the temperature dropped. As the police stood outside observing the fire, they reached some preliminary conclusions. They determined that the house was clearly not the owner's official residence since it was situated in a remote and isolated area. Additionally, the house was very small, measuring less than 60 square meters, and it was likely a vacation home. Through their ongoing surveillance, the police suspected there might be more victims beyond the remains they had found, but they could not confirm this. To gather more insights, they decided to examine the nearby area. The total area associated with the house was 8 hectares and was owned by someone. On the property, they discovered a large trailer and an old pickup truck, which were registered to a company. They were able to check the license plates to identify the vehicle's owner, who might have been in the house during the fire. The search was quick, revealing that the truck and trailer belonged to a company called Buchanan Construction, owned by an individual named Adam Buchanan. Adam lived 250 kilometers, 155 miles, away, which is about a 3-hour drive. This information supported the police's suspicion that the house was merely a vacation retreat for those looking to escape the city. However, it remained to be determined who had been inside, Adam himself or someone else. Late on September 13th, 2 bodies were discovered in the burning building. The name of the company owner provided detectives with their first lead in the investigation. The police were tasked with checking on the well-being of all members of the Buchanan family to see if they were at home. They arrived at the family's residence and soon noticed a white Ford pickup truck in the driveway. A young man named Nolan Buchanan emerged from the house, surprised to see the uniformed officers, and asked about the reason for their visit. The police did not disclose the reason right away, wanting first to determine who else was home. Nolan announced that he was Adam's son from Adam's first marriage. He stated that his father, Adam, had gone to the country estate with his fiancée, Molly, and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, for a short vacation, and they planned to return that evening. The officers needed to identify the bodies found in the house, as they might belong to the Buchanan family members. Nolan stated that there should have been 3 people in the home, but only 2 bodies were found in the debris. To determine the identities, further examination was required, but the wreckage was still too hot for a thorough inspection. The next day, September 14th, the El Dorado County Police planned to speak with Nolan again to gather more information about the victims of the fire. The officers met with Adam's parents, who expressed their concern that their son, the owner of the burnt house, had not reached out to them. During their conversation, it became apparent that Adam, who had some experience with repairs, had been working on fixing the house. Although the building was connected to a generator, there was no electricity at the time of the incident. However, there were gas cylinders present, suggesting that the fire could have started accidentally or been set intentionally, both possibilities remained open. Afterward, the police continued to search the forest area and gathered some evidence, though it was insufficient to advance the investigation. They could only access the ruins of the burned house on September 15th. Investigators hoped that the objects discovered inside would provide crucial information for understanding the incident that occurred there. During the excavation process, they discovered a third body, which attracted a lot of attention from the investigators because there was a round hole in one of the bones. This discovery suggested that something sinister had happened within the house. Accidental death was ruled out, and the possibility of murder became the primary focus. There was a strong belief that the fire had been set to destroy evidence of the crime. However, questions remained about how the incident occurred. Was it a botched burglary, or was a dangerous killer responsible for the deaths in that area? While the victims had not yet been identified, there was a strong likelihood that they were all members of the Buchanan family. To confirm this, the remains were sent to a forensic expert for an autopsy, with instructions to identify the bodies and determine their causes of death. It was discovered that one victim had been attacked in the torso, and another victim had a bullet fragment found in their vertebra. Unfortunately, the second body was too severely charred to yield much information, but the presence of cartridges nearby strongly suggested intentional murder. The remains of a third individual, identified as a skull fragment, confirmed that the person had died from a weapon attached to the head. The medical examiner revealed that the victim was a child. Detectives verified their suspicions about the identities of the deceased, confirming they were members of the Buchanan family: Adam, Gavin, and Molly McAfee. All three of them had been attacked. The police faced a difficult challenge in informing the victims' families about their tragic fate. The families had held on to hope until the end, struggling to accept the reality of their loss, and nothing could truly prepare them for the heartbreaking news. Upon learning what happened, the relatives were left devastated and grief-stricken. Neither Molly, known for her cheerful and friendly demeanor, nor Adam, who cherished his partner, had any enemies who would wish them harm. Although Adam had experienced a difficult marriage and raised his son Nolan from that relationship, this alone seemed unlikely to lead to murder. Marriages often have their ups and downs, and many couples find themselves separated or divorced. After parting ways with his first wife, Adam continued to care for their son, Nolan, hoping that Nolan would one day take over his construction business. After overcoming his emotional pain, Adam decided to seek a new relationship with Molly through a dating website. Their first date took place at a Starbucks coffee shop. They discovered they had much in common, including Molly's experience working in a construction company. It was love at first sight. Adam wasted no time in inviting Molly to move in with him, and she happily agreed. Their life together blossomed, and for 10 years, they enjoyed a deep and fulfilling partnership. Both of them dreamed of having a child. A few years after they met, Molly became pregnant and gave birth to Gavin, who became a half-brother to Nolan, Adam's eldest son. It seemed like a perfect family picture. However, family members noticed that their relationship was not as stable as it appeared. Adam and Molly often argued. Although Molly never filed for divorce, she would occasionally take their son and stay at her parents' house for a few days. It was also revealed that Adam and Molly liked to hunt near their country home. Since both owned weapons, investigators speculated that during one of their arguments, one of them might have grabbed a weapon, leading to a tragic outcome. The investigation raised concerns. If the tragedy stemmed from a conflict between the couple, there should have been a weapon found next to one of the bodies. The police carried out a thorough search of the scene to find the weapon involved in the incident. The possibility that the weapon had been badly damaged or almost completely destroyed in the fire was considered, but the search for it continued. If the weapon had been found, it would have supported the theory that Adam and Molly were involved. If not, it would suggest that an outsider may have harmed the family. Over 5 days, forensic team members methodically sifted through the ashes of the house. Their thorough search ultimately yielded no weapons, leading to the conclusion that Adam and Molly were not the perpetrators. It was also clear that 8-year-old Gavin was innocent, indicating that a fourth person was involved in the incident. The absence of a murder weapon was troubling, as it meant the investigation had to restart from square one, without any suspects or evidence. As is customary in such cases, detectives meticulously examined the family's history and relationships. While they had already interviewed Adam's parents, they had not yet spoken with his eldest son, Nolan. It was time to ask him some questions. The 16-year-old boy, Nolan, shared that after his parents divorced, he felt very anxious but tried to stay strong. He lived with his grandparents. When asked why he didn't go on vacation with his relatives, he explained that he felt it was his responsibility to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. According to Nolan, they got into an old pickup truck and headed to Greenwood, the same truck that the police had seen near the burning building. Adam chose to use the service vehicle rather than his own because it was loaded with stones he planned to use for landscaping at his country home. The investigators asked Nolan if he was aware of any issues with his neighbors. He replied that someone was regularly growing banned substances on his family's remote property. This caught the detectives' attention, particularly because, in this part of the United States, violent crime is often associated with the cultivation of banned substances. The conversation with Nolan continued, shifting to the family business. He revealed that his father's business had been struggling lately. The company was facing significant challenges in the United States, with its employee count dwindling to just 5. Financially, the situation was critical, and the debts related to the business were quickly accumulating, according to what his father reported. Fortunately, the investigation had gathered valuable information, allowing the case to progress. On September 18, 2015, investigators began looking into a conflict that arose regarding the cultivation of illegal plants in that area. It was revealed that there was indeed a disagreement between Adam and his neighbors. He confronted them, demanding that they stop growing and harvesting the tree on his property, threatening to involve the police if they did not comply. Detectives believed that this ultimatum could potentially escalate into a desire to harm Adam's family. However, no one knew which neighbor was involved. To gather more details about the situation, the investigators decided to explore the neighborhood on foot. One of the investigators had a breakthrough when he met a man who admitted to arguing with Adam over the cultivation of an illegal crop. The argument was intense, but they managed to resolve their differences. However, Adam's business was facing a financial crisis. On September 17, police conducted a raid on Adam's company, confirming Nolan's claims about its dire situation. Debts exceeding $30,000 were putting it at risk of bankruptcy, leading to layoffs of some employees. It came to light that some of these former employees were very unhappy about being let go and might have motives related to the murder investigation. Investigators sought and obtained a warrant to access the company's premises and review its documents. The following day, September 19, local high school students participated in a community cleanup just a mile away from Adam's construction company. During the cleanup process, a student discovered a small bag hidden behind a bush, with a weapon next to it. The school management promptly informed the police, who examined the bag and found Adam's identification inside it. This led to a new theory: the victims were murdered, the weapon was found, and the killer may have taken Adam's documents in order to obstruct the investigation. The discovery was crucial, revealing that someone had traveled from Greenwood to confront the family before returning to Benicia, where they abandoned the bag and weapon. It was likely that the perpetrator was from the local area. Detectives were convinced that the culprit was one of the employees from Adam's construction company, as evidence was discovered just a mile away from the company's headquarters. The weapon and the items found in the bag were well preserved, so they were sent for examination. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators began examining the company's buildings, focusing particularly on financial records that could reveal the names of potential creditors. During the investigation, detectives discovered a surveillance camera at the company's premises, which was a welcome sign. The camera was aimed at the center of the parking lot. Knowing that the family had gone to the countryside on Friday, September 11th, the investigators decided to review the footage from that day to see if anything unusual occurred. In the video, they spotted a large trailer that had previously come to their attention near the family's burned home. The footage also showed Adam and Molly loading pallets of decorative rocks. However, a critical moment changed the course of the investigation. Although it initially seemed insignificant, the vehicle towing the trailer was not the old white pickup parked at the burnt house. it was a white Ford that had been seen in the driveway of the Buchanan home when investigators first questioned Nolan. He had falsely claimed that his relatives had left in the old pickup. With this revelation, the police became very interested in his story. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, had a suspicion that something was off when she noticed a Ford parked near the burnt house, which was later replaced by an old car. Concerned, she called the police after a strange incident during a family dinner earlier that week. Nolan, who had been questioned about the country house, made an unusual remark, claiming he was no longer just an heir but now the owner. Although his father, Adam, had founded the company, Nolan insisted that the rights had transferred to him. Nolan explained how he planned to take control of the family business and sell its assets to prevent its downfall. It was surprising to hear such statements from someone so young, especially after losing his family. Susie, puzzled by Nolan's odd behavior, contacted the police to express her concerns. As a result, the police summoned Nolan for another interrogation. They did not charge him with any crime or demand explanations. They merely took his statement, in which he spoke vaguely about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. During the second questioning, Nolan provided more details. He claimed that he spent Saturday alone on September 12, 2015, attended church with his girlfriend and her family on Sunday morning. Later, he met friends at the shopping center and then returned to see his girlfriend. The investigators allowed him to continue without interruption but asked once how he had paid for his shopping and date expenses. Nolan said his father's bank card was at home and he used it. Following this, the police requested a search warrant for Adam's house, anticipating valuable evidence. They hoped to seize the bank card to review any transactions. The warrant was granted, and investigators rushed to Adam's house, where they found the card in the upper part of a safe. They also noticed a Ford parked in the driveway, which had dirt lodged in the wheels. It had just rained, and according to the police, the dirt on the wheels might have been washed away or at least significantly reduced. Additionally, a construction company's surveillance camera showed that Nolan had lied about the old pickup truck that the family was supposed to have left behind. The Ford was confiscated for further analysis, making Nolan the main suspect in the murder. Even though he was already under police scrutiny, gathering enough evidence to prove his involvement would be challenging, especially since he was a minor accused of murdering his family. The suspicions were confirmed when the investigation began with laboratory tests on the murder weapon, which revealed Nolan's fingerprints. This indicates that he possessed a weapon. However, further evidence is needed to prove that he went to the scene where his family was present. Detectives examined the bank transactions of Molly and Adam in the days leading up to the murder. A transaction took place on September 11th, just as the family was getting ready to go to their country house. A payment of $36 was made at a restaurant in a small town along the route to Greenwood. When investigators contacted the restaurant management, they confirmed that they had surveillance cameras. The timing of the transaction allowed detectives to establish when the family should have been at the restaurant. In the video footage, they identified the same white Ford towing a large trailer, which had been seen at the crime scene and had been searched and confiscated a few days earlier. Law enforcement officers discovered a receipt for a transaction on Friday, September 11, 2015, which raised questions about the details of the order. The receipt indicated that several sandwiches and 4 drinks had been purchased. Since the Buchanans were a group of 3, the question arose, why would they order 4 drinks? Investigators collected the bag and other trash found in the car to reconstruct the menu associated with the receipt. They also reviewed the trash discovered earlier in the investigation in front of the vacation home. Upon comparing their findings, investigators confirmed that the Ford pickup truck had indeed been in Greenwood. The next bank card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at a vending machine in a bar approximately a 30-minute drive from Greenwood. As in the first case, investigators visited the bar to review the surveillance footage. The video clearly showed Molly, as well as a woman nearby withdrawing $40 from an ATM to cover expenses. It was clear that Molly and Adam were present, as their car was visible in the footage outside the bar. This was significant because it confirmed that Adam had his bank card with him that evening, and it remained with him throughout the weekend. After determining the time Molly and Adam left the bar, detectives tracked their route. A restaurant along the way had a camera facing the highway, making it a valuable resource. Investigators reviewed the footage and verified that the Ford truck was headed toward Greenwood around 2:30 a.m. It was widely accepted that Adam and Molly were in the vehicle. However, at 3:30, the same pickup truck was noted returning. Detectives became convinced that, at that moment, Nolan was in the car, driving home after committing the act of killing his family and disposing of their bodies. On September 13th, new transactions were reviewed, including purchases at McDonald's and gas stations. The records indicated that there was no food for 4 people in the paid order. It was noted that the Ford was still parked near the burned house and was driven by Nolan. The detectives checked with the bank and confirmed that only one card had been issued in Adam's name. It was clear that this card had been used between September 11th and 13th in Greenwood. With solid evidence in hand, the detectives returned to question Nolan, who was still in high school at that time. Nolan was called out of class for questioning. He said his father had left his bank card at home and had driven to a country house in an old pickup truck, not the Ford he was driving. Faced with the evidence, he fell silent, realizing that the police had caught on to him. After a tense silence, Nolan was officially arrested for the crime committed at the Greenwood house. In November 2015, Nolan was charged with the premeditated murder of his father, Adam, his stepmother, Molly, and his younger brother, Gavin. The defense quickly appealed to a juvenile court to have the case dismissed in Nolan's favor. The legal proceedings in adult court lasted 2 years, and in 2017, they received a response to their request. The ruling confirmed that Nolan would be tried as an adult, even though he had not yet turned 18 at the time of the crimes. The hearings were highly emotional as Nolan claimed he wasn't the killer. He insisted that his father was responsible and that he was merely defending himself. This shocking statement surprised not only the police but also the families of both Adam and Molly. Nolan said he was resting at their family's Greenwood home on September 12th, while Gavin was sleeping in a bed nearby. They both suddenly woke to loud noises and screaming. At that moment, Nolan noticed a weapon aimed at Gavin, and then a shot was fired, killing his younger brother. In a state of panic, Nolan lunged for the weapon. Miraculously, he managed to push the attacker away, take control of the weapon, and attack the man twice. Only after the attack did he realize that the person he was confronting was his father. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he then poured gasoline from a car onto the house and set it ablaze to make it look like nothing had happened. He subsequently left Greenwood in the family's white Ford. However, this account was challenged by a forensic expert, who noted that a bullet impact found on a fragment of Gavin's skull indicated that a shot was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. The prosecution concluded that Nolan, left alone at home while his parents were at a bar, waited for their return before killing both of them. Evidence suggests he killed Adam first, followed by Molly. Afterward, Nolan took his stepmother's bag and set the house on fire. On Sunday, he spent the day with his girlfriend to establish an alibi. However, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, as he has not confessed. Some speculated could be related to money. Perhaps he thought he could manage the family business better than his father. On July 13, 2018, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nolan Buchanan guilty of murdering Adam, Molly, and their son Gavin. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison but will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The Nolan Buchanan case is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many questions for the residents of Greenwood and the Adam and Molly families. The family had a seemingly peaceful vacation at a vacation home in the woods, but tragedy suddenly struck, taking the lives of Adam, Molly, and Gavin. Nolan, a 16-year-old boy, went from heir to murderer and was sentenced to 150 years in prison for premeditated murder. The true motive behind this brutal act remains a mystery known only to Nolan. However, he has chosen to keep it a secret, leaving behind loss and sorrow for those left behind. Thank you for following this story. Please share your thoughts and don't forget to check out the next episodes on our channel. See you again.
Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Michelle Leng. In 2018, 20-year-old Michelle Ling departed from a major airport in northern Sichuan province, China, during a heavy rainstorm. She tearfully bid farewell to her mother, who had become her closest confidant since her father's passing in 2008. Michelle embarked on her journey to Australia, a country she had long dreamed of studying in since childhood. After an 11-hour flight, Michelle arrived in Sydney. Although it was her first time traveling such a great distance alone, her determination to pursue her dream helped her overcome any challenges she faced. Upon landing, she was greeted by her aunt and her cousin, who was just 2 years younger than Michelle. She lived happily with her 48-year-old aunt, her aunt's young husband Derek Barrett, and her cousin in their house. Michelle had her own room where she spent most of her free time reading and drawing, which were her favorite hobbies. Michelle was a bright and ambitious student who pursued economics and hospitality management at the University of Technology in Sydney. She was outgoing, adaptable, and easily made new friends. Like many young women her age, Michelle enjoyed sharing her social life on social media, posting pictures of herself enjoying cocktails with friends and engaging in adventurous activities. Michelle had a passion for exploration and was always ready for new experiences. She frequently traveled around New South Wales on day trips and even ventured as far as Hobart for vacations. Her adventurous spirit was evident in her recent social media posts, which included videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, photos from Resolute Beach in Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park north of the city, and images from Berry Beach on the south coast. On June 13, 2013, Michelle went to Snapper Point where she bravely took a photo of herself on the edge of a cliff. She then shared this ominous photo on her Instagram account. Michelle was excelling in her studies, making new friends, and had found a part-time job. Eager to organize her personal life, she regularly communicated with men on dating sites and went on trial dates. She led an active and busy life. She attended her classes during the day, then rushed to work. On weekends, she made sure to meet up with her friends and visit places. On April 21, 2016, Michelle spent the day with a friend at the mall, having lunch and shopping. Later, she took a train and was last seen getting off at Central Station around 4:30 p.m. She disappeared after that. 2 days later, Derek went to the train station to pick up his wife, who was returning from a business trip. Derek's aunt asked him about Michelle, and he informed her that he hadn't seen Michelle in 2 days. Derek, who had been jobless for a while, had a habit of staying up late on his computer and sleeping until the afternoon. Although it was possible he hadn't seen Michelle, the situation was concerning because no one had heard from her since April 22, and her phone was turned off. Michelle's aunt grew increasingly worried after calling all of Michelle's friends and acquaintances. Upon inspecting Michelle's room, everything appeared to be in its usual perfect order. After examining Michelle's laptop, the family concluded that she hadn't returned from her date, and they feared something might have happened to her. Michelle's disappearance was particularly alarming because she typically maintained daily contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. On the day following Michelle's disappearance, her aunt and uncle Derek reported her missing to the police and informed the Chinese embassy. On April 24, 2016, tourists discovered a woman's body in a plastic bag at Snapper Point. While Michelle's relatives in both China and Australia were searching for her, local news channels reported the discovery of the unidentified body. When a sketch of the victim was released, it became clear that the body was Michelle's. Police took 3 days to officially identify her using the sketch. Subsequently, Michelle's case was officially classified as a missing person, and an investigation began. After interviewing close relatives who lived with Michelle, the initial theory was that she had been attacked by a stranger she had planned to meet that day. Security cameras recorded her movements on the day of her disappearance. In the footage and during a short train ride, Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was in a hurry to get home. The analysis of her social media accounts and correspondence did not confirm the existence of a young man she might have arranged to meet. Thus, the theory about a mysterious stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. The autopsy confirmed that Michelle's body had multiple injuries, indicating she likely tried to defend herself from her attacker, suffering several stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubin stated that the evidence suggests Michelle was brutally assaulted before her death. She was last seen on her way home and didn't deviate to any other location, which raises questions about who could have attacked her so violently. The inspector also noted that the perpetrator probably deliberately chose a very isolated area in an otherwise beautiful place. The body was found in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, but at a specific spot that was quite secluded. Forensic analysis revealed that Michelle's body had been in the water for less than 48 hours, possibly much less. The police chief inspector noted that while the body was found far from the national park entrance, a nearby parking lot made it possible for someone to transport the body by car. Homicide detectives examined CCTV footage and traffic cameras to trace Michelle's final movements. They also interviewed family members, friends, and co-workers to gather more information, aiming to reconstruct the events leading up to her death and understand the family dynamics in Michelle's household. Inspector Gary stressed that based on all gathered information, Michelle was known to be very responsible and consistently communicated her whereabouts to her family. Her sudden disappearance raised significant concerns for her well-being. Surprisingly, for 2 days, her family either didn't realize she was missing or chose to ignore it. As Derek was the last person known to have seen Michelle alive, police brought him in for questioning. Investigators found his stories about nighttime activities and extended daytime sleeping suspicious, leading them to conduct follow-up interviews. During these, they probed into his relationship with Michelle and asked him to recall their last encounter in detail. Derek, overwhelmed by the intense questioning, stopped answering and requested legal representation. His unusual behavior raised suspicions, leading to his arrest as a suspect. The arrest was explained by 2 key pieces of evidence. First, investigators discovered that Derek's cell phone signal placed him in the vicinity where Michelle's body was found on April 24. Second, police obtained surveillance footage from a nearby parking lot, showing a car matching Derek's vehicle in the early morning hours of that same day. These findings strongly suggested Derek's presence at the crime scene, leaving little doubt about his involvement. Derek denied the accusations and claimed that his presence in the parking lot was a mere coincidence, insisting that the car wasn't his. However, the surveillance footage was clear enough to prove he was there. The police charged him for the death of 25-year-old Michelle, whose naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a blowhole on the central coast of New South Wales. The news of Derek's arrest and the charges against him shocked Michelle's entire family. The police spoke with Michelle's mother, who was devastated by her daughter's death and rushed to Sydney to see the place where her only daughter's dreams and life came to an end. She still couldn't come to terms with her passing. Derek Barrett, a 27-year-old man married to Michelle's aunt, was charged with the murder of the 25-year-old student. Police released CCTV footage showing Michelle's final movements on April 21 in Sydney's central business district. The video captured her shopping at Pitt Street Mall and then taking a train from St James Station to Casula in Sydney's southwest. Investigators believe Michelle returned to her family home in Casula that afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. It is presumed that she was murdered in her home. CCTV footage reportedly showed a vehicle entering Lake Munmora National Park around 7 a.m. on April 24. Police believe Michelle's body was in this vehicle. Although Derek was arrested and charged initially, the investigation continued. As more information about Michelle's final moments came to light, additional charges were filed against Derek. These included 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a filming device, and murder. The investigation also uncovered that the suspect had an inappropriate sexual interest in his wife's young niece. Analysis of Derek's cell phone revealed crucial evidence. Deleted files were recovered that demonstrated his involvement in Michelle's death and his unhealthy obsession with her. It was discovered that Derek had installed a hidden camera in the shared bathroom and regularly reviewed the recordings. The phone also contained images taken shortly before Michelle's death. Records showed that Michelle arrived home on April 21 around 5 p.m. Her last text message was sent close to midnight, and she was not heard from again after that. During the night, Derek carried out his wicked plan. He entered Michelle's room while she was sleeping to record her, as he had done before, but this time she woke up and he attacked her. He tied her up and covered her mouth with duct tape to silence her. Derek kept Michelle tied to the bed for 2 days, periodically abusing her. Investigators found photos on Derek's phone showing Michelle naked and bound, with an expression of terror. These images didn't show the injuries that eventually caused her death. The last photo was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23, when Michelle was still alive. On April 23, Derek's stepson came home twice, not hearing Michelle's quiet moans. Derek was taking a shower at the time. Security cameras recorded Derek leaving the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Michelle was likely already dead by then, and after showering and washing off the blood, Derek thoroughly cleaned the house, hiding any evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24 at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. On the way, he stopped at a gas station where he bought drinks and filled up his car. He was captured there by security cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point around 9 a.m., he disposed of Michelle's body and took some photographs of the area. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who didn't notice anything unusual in his behavior. He then returned home to wait for his wife's return. With complete calmness, he reported several times that he hadn't seen Michelle and that she hadn't come home. Cynically, he accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing person report. The Derek judicial hearing was held on June 29, 2016. Bill Whitby, Derek's lawyer, informed the local Bowood court that his client pleaded not guilty and was as shocked and grief-stricken by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle's friends and family filled the courtroom, but Derek didn't need to be present. He later appeared via video conference. A day before the hearing, the accused had stated that he didn't remember much about the hours leading up to Michelle's murder due to his use of illegal drugs. He also informed the court that he only had vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle's body off the cliff. Before the court hearing, Derek underwent a psychological evaluation. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard challenged Derek's claims of memory loss. Dr. Richard testified that Derek was mentally fit to receive the full sentence for his actions. He explained that the drugs Derek had been taking were not known to cause memory loss. Dr. Richard argued that all of Derek's actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were deliberate and purposeful. He also reported that Derek's IQ, concentration, and memory were within normal ranges. Furthermore, Dr. Richard dismissed Derek's claims of memory loss, stating that the high number of stab wounds suggested sadistic tendencies rather than emotional outbursts or memory lapses. This expert testimony significantly undermined Derek's defense. The psychologist also rejected Derek's claim that he had no sexual attraction towards the victim. Derek tied up, gagged, and stabbed the young girl 30 times, but he claimed to have no memory of these acts. Dr. Richard also told the court that the accused was faking amnesia to lessen his responsibility for the crime, after claiming not to remember the period during which he had apprehended and killed Michelle. During the trial, Derek tried to explain his crime by claiming to be addicted to illegal drugs. However, this claim was also questioned by the doctor. Richard pointed out that Derek's statement was contradictory, as it was obvious that Derek had gained weight during this period. Judge Wilson stated that in his 30 years as a criminal defense lawyer, he had never seen an obese person addicted to substances. During a court hearing in Sydney, Derek's demeanor exhibited characteristics often associated with psychopathy. His crime was not attributed to intoxication, poor decision-making, or a history of abuse. At a retrial in August, Derek admitted to murdering and kidnapping Michelle, as well as secretly entering her room on 2 occasions while she slept to make videos. He also confessed to taking 19 explicit photographs of Michelle shortly before her death. Derek claimed he had no recollection of the 48-hour period surrounding the murder, including cleaning the crime scene and disposing of the body, due to being under the influence of illegal substances. He stated that his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and his niece's terrified face as she screamed at him. Judge Wilson dismissed Derek's claims of memory loss and lack of remorse as insincere. The Michelle family comforted each other while Derek tearfully insisted he deserved to live and expressed regret for his actions. Judge Wilson described the crime as depraved and brutal, carried out by a trusted relative. As the judge recounted Derek's fantasies and actions, he stared at the floor, no longer reveling in the attention. It was clear his attempts to deceive had failed. Despite claiming drug-induced memory lapses, the events were likely vivid in his mind. Throughout the court proceedings, Derek remained stoic, repeatedly uttering his victim's name. In his statement to the court, Chief Inspector Gary Jubilant from the NSW Police Homicide Unit described the crime as horrific and senseless. He expressed satisfaction that justice was served but emphasized that there was no happiness in such a case. Judge Wilson handed down a sentence of 34 years and 6 months to 28-year-old Derek Barrett, with a maximum term of 46 years. Barrett will be eligible for parole in 2050. He remained emotionless as the sentence was delivered. Michelle Lin's mother expressed her gratitude to both the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during this difficult time of grief. She specifically acknowledged the efforts of the NSW police, particularly Detective Inspector Gary Jubilant from the Homicide Squad, for their work in investigating her daughter's death. To assist with funeral expenses and provide financial support for Mrs. Leng when she returns to China, a fund has been established. Michelle's tragic story took an unexpected turn 4 years after her death. During a routine visit to her elderly mother, a woman made a shocking discovery. She found her mother holding an unfamiliar USB drive in the kitchen. Curious about its contents, the daughter plugged the device into her computer. To her horror, she found it contained disturbing videos and photos of a sexual nature. Alarmed, she immediately contacted the police. Upon investigation, authorities discovered that the USB drive held 9 video files totaling over an hour in length, as well as 13 photo files. These files documented the abuse Michelle endured shortly before her murder on April 23, 2016, providing crucial evidence in the case. The woman had no apparent connection to Derek and lived about 6 kilometers from his former home. The origin of the USB device and how it ended up in the woman's family home is unknown. The police were able to link the photos found on the USB to those Derek had deleted from his phone before his arrest, in an attempt to hide his crimes. In 2020, Derek was charged with several sexual offenses after videos of him abusing Michelle were discovered on the USB device in November 2019. However, the police and prosecutors admitted they had hit a dead end regarding the discovery of the device, which led to the new charges. The prosecutor Hugh Baker informed the court that the elderly woman with dementia was confined to her home and only went out to the yard. There's no explanation for how the USB ended up in the woman's possession at the residence in Strathfield, Hugh told the court. Based on new facts and evidence, Derek's sentence was extended without the possibility of parole after images accidentally found revealed the full extent of his abuse against Michelle before murdering her. This horrible and depraved secret, discovered by chance in the hands of an elderly woman in a leafy Sydney suburb, resulted in additional years of well-deserved punishment for the convicted criminal, on top of his already lengthy sentence. The tragic case of Michelle Leng serves as a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. Michelle, a vibrant young woman with dreams of a bright future, fell victim to a betrayal from within her own family. The harrowing details of her story reveal the depths of human depravity and the complexities of trust and betrayal. As justice was ultimately served, it leaves a lingering sense of sorrow for the life cut short and a call to honor Michelle's memory by remaining vigilant against such heinous acts in our communities.
Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Stephanie Scott. Stephanie Scott is 26 years old, a kind and intelligent person who always has a smile on her face. She was very active as a child, participating in school clubs and sports. As an adult, she followed in her father Robert's footsteps as a teacher, sharing his passion for education. She teaches English and drama at Leon High School and takes great pride in her work. Stephanie and her fiancé Aaron have known each other since they were children. They spent time together, shared common interests, and played sports in their hometown. They were best friends until Aaron turned 21, when their relationship blossomed into love. In April 2015, the couple was busy preparing for their wedding, scheduled for April 11th. Stephanie, a perfectionist, spent months planning every detail, from the preparations to their honeymoon in Tahiti. She had just had her bachelorette party and the couple had learned their first dance for their wedding day. Everything was almost ready, but sadly their dream did not come true. April 2015 was a reminder to Stephanie and Aaron that their wedding day was approaching. While Aaron had plans to attend a party in the suburbs, he invited Stephanie to come along, but she decided to stay and focus on finishing up work before their honeymoon. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, Stephanie arrived at her school in Leon, New South Wales, at around 11 a.m. to hand over some work to her teacher. She parked her car on the street and walked to meet a colleague, with whom she unlocked the school gate. Stephanie then locked the gate and, key in hand, headed to the English teacher's office. There, she emailed a bus company to confirm transportation arrangements for her wedding guests. Stephanie spent a few hours working, feeling happy that she had completed all her tasks. When she was done, she left the administration building, heading toward the gate to leave. Aaron, knowing that Stephanie had left and would be away for a few hours, became anxious as the evening approached. He had texted her the day before and received a prompt response. However, on April 5th, he received no response from Stephanie. Returning home after 7 p.m., Aaron found that Stephanie had not returned, and her car was not on the street. He tried to control his anxiety, reassuring himself that the stress of the upcoming wedding and being away from school for such a long time might be affecting Stephanie, making her want some alone time. However, such complete silence was out of character for her. Even as she eagerly planned her wedding, Stephanie enjoyed every minute, eagerly sharing details about her wedding dress and menu. She did not appear nervous or bored, but instead excited and ready for her big day. Aaron's concern for Stephanie grew, and he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he sent her another text, but when he didn't receive a response, he decided to contact her family for support. It had been more than 24 hours since he had been unable to reach Stephanie, prompting Aaron to go to the Leon Police Department to officially report her missing. Police opened an investigation, beginning with a search of the area around Stephanie's last known location. When they discovered that her car was also missing, they began to speculate about what might have happened. One possible scenario was that Stephanie had left school and gotten into a car accident, or perhaps gotten stuck in a ditch or creek. A search effort was launched, with helicopters scanning the area from above and police units conducting ground searches. Last known location of the high school where she worked. Affected by Easter Sunday and the limited number of people at the school, there were few witnesses, complicating the police investigation. When they checked the school's alarm system, they discovered that Stephanie had turned it off in her classroom at 1:30 p.m. and turned it back on 8 minutes later, pinpointing her exact location at that time. However, this detail was the only information the police were able to gather. When they attempted to track Stephanie's phone, they discovered that it was turned off and there was no recent activity on her bank account or social media after Saturday, April 4th. Local news began reporting the story on April 7th, as hundreds of people in the small town searched for any information about Stephanie. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, expressed concern that if her daughter was not found soon, it could indicate that something terrible had happened. Police refocused their search efforts on the school, using digital mapping technology to examine the premises and pinpoint the specific room where Stephanie was last seen working before she went missing. A witness who was near Leon High School on Easter Sunday reported hearing unusual noises around 2 p.m., including rustling and dragging sounds. At the time, the witness did not think much of seeing Stephanie's car parked under the covered walkway. However, the car was gone by then. Another witness, a school employee, had a strange conversation with a cleaner. The day after Stephanie went missing, the employee mentioned the rumors surrounding Stephanie's disappearance to the cleaner and asked when he had last seen her. The cleaner replied that he had not seen Stephanie on the day she went missing. When asked if he thought Stephanie might have run away due to post-wedding stress, the cleaner smiled strangely and nervously, making the employee feel uncomfortable. The employee also noticed that the cleaner had scratches on her face. The police decided to question the cleaner, 24-year-old Vincent Stanford, for more information. Vincent told the police that he had stopped by the school to take out the trash, despite not being scheduled to work that day. He claimed that he did not stay long because he was in a hurry to go shopping. Vincent insisted that he had not seen Stephanie at the time and wished them luck in their search. He added that he had left the school after 3 p.m. to go to the store where he usually shopped. However, when the police contacted the store, they discovered that it was closed that day, contrary to Vincent's statement. This led the police to suspect Vincent of lying, and he became a suspect in the investigation. The police decided to conduct a thorough interview with Vincent and went to his home where he lived with his mother. When they arrived, they found Vincent absent, but his mother allowed them to enter the house. The police search of the house eventually uncovered a set of keys attached to a red and white string. These keys were very similar to the missing Stephanie's keys. As the police continued to collect evidence, Vincent returned home and was immediately arrested by the police, while his car was also impounded. In the back seat, they found several MDF boards that appeared to be covered in blood. The police also noticed that the tire marks in front of the house did not match those of Vincent's car. Additionally, a used condom was found on the ground with the wrapper in the bedroom. The police questioned Vincent about his whereabouts that day. He pointed to a camera in the front seat and claimed that he was taking pictures. The police asked to see the contents of the camera, and Vincent reluctantly agreed. When they turned on the camera, they saw a horrifying image of a charred, dead woman lying in a wooded area. Vincent initially tried to dismiss the image as a still from a movie he had starred in, thinking it was funny. However, the police quickly realized that the image was actually a photo of a real crime scene, with the victim being Stephanie. Vincent Stanford, a janitor at Leon High School, was immediately arrested. A search of his phone and laptop revealed a collection of images, including photos of young girls from school and from the internet, as well as photos of women he had apparently stalked. The discovery painted a dark picture of Vincent's behavior. Although Stephanie Scott's body has not been found, Vincent Stanford, 24, was charged with murder on April 9th. News of the arrest spread quickly. Stephanie's car had previously been found abandoned in a remote area about 5 miles from where she was last known to be. However, her body remains missing, prompting the search to continue. Police are still working to determine the exact location where her body was photographed. On April 17th, 5 days after Stephanie went missing, another witness came forward. He reported seeing a car near a canal around 4 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A man got out of the car and threw what appeared to be a laptop into the water before driving away. Police later recovered the laptop from the bottom of the canal, confirming it was Stephanie's. The search for Stephanie's body continues in the New South Wales Rivers area, where police divers have been scouring the waterways. Reporter Natalie Cooper, in a live broadcast, discussed the ongoing search for Stephanie's body. Meanwhile, police have expanded their search to fields and vineyards near where Stephanie's red Mazda was found earlier this week. Despite a search by police divers in the canal, Stephanie's body has not been found. Reporter Natalie reported that a makeshift shrine near the site of the tragedy was visited by many people that morning. Bystanders and her family and fiancé had visited the shrine the night before, surname lighting candles and praying together. Vincent, who was in police custody, asked to speak to the police. During the conversation, he gave them detailed information about the case, including the location of Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was working on her computer in the upstairs staff room with the office door open. Vincent was using a vacuum to clean out the trash and needed to move some bins upstairs. As he approached the room, he saw Stephanie. Vincent told the police that he suddenly had the idea of killing her and quickly went home to get his special kit, which included handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and toiletries. He also did a Google search on violent crimes on the way back. On his way back, Vincent encountered Stephanie as she was leaving. She smiled and wished him a happy Easter as she passed by. However, in a sudden and unexpected move, Vincent grabbed her and dragged her into a nearby storage room. When police questioned him about the scratches on his face, he revealed that they were from Stephanie's microphone and her fingernails when she defended herself while he tried to kill her. Vincent described the attack on Stephanie in detail, saying that he approached her from behind, covered her mouth with one hand and held her waist with the other. He took her to the storage room, slamming the door. Inside, he violently threw her to the ground, hitting her repeatedly. After the attack, Vincent used a knife to kill Stephanie. He admitted that the act was motivated by homicidal urges, revealing that he had sadistic thoughts and had committed murders before. Although he speculated that he may have had some psychological issues, Vincent said that he did not hate his victims but instead felt pleasure from the act of killing. Vincent then felt hungry and went home to eat a sandwich and drink coffee, leaving Stephanie's body in the storage room. After eating, he returned to the school and placed her body in the trunk of his car. He then drove home. On Easter Monday, Vincent took Stephanie's car and drove to a national park. There, he removed her body from the trunk and removed her clothes. He observed that her face had multiple injuries, including severe bruising and swelling on the right side of her face, as well as bruising under her eye. Vincent then covered the body with branches and poured gasoline over her. He lit the gasoline with a match. Before leaving, he stayed at the scene for a while and took several photographs. After setting up the camera to take pictures of Stephanie's body, Vincent waited 5 minutes to ensure the fire had burned out before leaving the scene. He abandoned Stephanie's car on a deserted country road and walked back to town. During questioning, Vincent denied abusing Stephanie despite police evidence suggesting he had abused her, leading to additional charges of causing grievous bodily harm and injury. When questioned about her earrings and wedding ring, he claimed he did not remember taking them off and may have thrown them away with the other items. In fact, Vincent took Stephanie's wedding ring and graduation ring, along with her earrings, and sent them to his twin brother, Marcus, in Adelaide. Marcus sold the items at a jewelry store and later destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photo of it. Vincent's brother Marcus Stanford, 24, was arrested at his Adelaide Hills home around 7 a.m. in connection with Stephanie's murder, leaving neighbors shocked and unsettled. Marcus, who appeared inconspicuous, worked on a flower farm, where colleagues described him as quiet and reserved, barely communicating with them outside of work hours. Marcus Stanford appeared without a lawyer during the trial and, with a strong Dutch accent, told the judge he had never been to Leeton and saw no reason to go there. Despite his testimony, he was taken to Sydney the following morning under police escort, where he was taken into custody. The search for Stephanie finally ended. Following Vincent's confession, police discovered her body in a national park 60 miles from Leon's secondary school. Detailed investigations revealed that Stephanie had been brutally beaten in the head a total of 40 times, resulting in her death. Her body was then dumped and burned. Photos found on Vincent's phone were confirmed to be of Stephanie, leaving no doubt as to his guilt. Both Vincent and his brother, Marcus, were subsequently brought to trial. Vincent initially denied any wrongdoing. However, based on the evidence presented by the police, it was decided that the case could lead to a conviction. Vincent was deemed a dangerous serial killer. He appeared to lack emotion and empathy, was cruel and indifferent, often laughing and not taking the situation seriously. A deeper look into Vincent Stanford's past revealed a number of disturbing facts. Born in Australia, Vincent moved to the Netherlands with his family when he was 3 years old before eventually returning to New South Wales. As a child, Vincent had disturbing thoughts. At age 7, he fantasized about murder. By age 12, he had nearly strangled a teacher, leading his classmates to label him a psychopath. Due to his violent and disobedient behavior issues, Vincent was sent to a reform school. He later expressed feelings of being unable to fit in with society and was later admitted to a psychiatric facility where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder. Vincent was rejected by both the university and the army after his release, so he worked a variety of jobs until he landed a job as a janitor at Leon Junior High School. His initial 5-week contract was later extended, allowing him to continue working at the school. During his time there, Vincent would often sneak into the girls' restroom during lunch breaks to secretly observe the students. An investigation of Vincent's phone revealed that he had been stalking several girls at the school, as well as 2 women who worked at nearby stores, before finally killing Stephanie. Police discovered a large collection of photos, nearly 2,000, of a young girl on his phone, along with diary entries documenting his obsession with the girl. In these diary entries, Vincent detailed his attempts to follow the girl home, recording her departures and even speculating about whether anyone else was with her. One diary entry stated, "She was home alone at 3:40 p.m., plenty of time to kidnap her." It appears that Vincent initially targeted the young girl, but once she left town, he shifted his focus to Stephanie, who worked at the school and was ultimately his victim. After a thorough search of Vincent's car, police found evidence of Stephanie's DNA on MDF boards. Inside Vincent's house, they discovered Stephanie's blood on several items, a knife, several condom packs, and her bra. Vincent's twin brother, Marcus, admitted to his role in the crime, including selling Stephanie's ring, destroying evidence, and helping Vincent cover up the truth. As a result, Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence was for his involvement in the murder of Stephanie Scott, and his prison term was set to end on September 9, 2016. If Marcus had not pleaded guilty, he would have received an 18-month sentence. In October 2016, Marcus Stanford was released from prison. After his release, more than 60 people signed a petition expressing their disagreement with the court's decision and asking for an appeal. The petition describes the court's decision as unacceptable. After his release, Marcus briefly returned to his hometown of Leon with his mother. However, people in his hometown made it clear that he was not welcome, forcing him to leave again. His current whereabouts are unknown. Since his release, Marcus has publicly apologized for his actions and promised not to cause any more trouble. He has admitted that his past behavior was foolish and has expressed remorse for the harm he has caused. Marcus has also stated that he has no intention of contacting his brother Vincent and does not want to reconcile with him. Steve, the twins' father, he is shocked, scared, and does not want to talk to or see Vincent. Steve admits that he does not understand why Vincent committed these crimes. Vincent Stanford was sentenced to life in prison for murder and 15 years for sexual violence, both sentences effective April 8, 2015. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, expressed her grief, saying that Vincent could not cope with his own life, so he took her daughter's life. Marilyn believed that this deprived Stephanie of the chance to have a happy future. Although the family did not know the full extent of Stephanie's pain, they knew that she had suffered unbearable pain. Therefore, the family wanted to stay away from the public to mourn their daughter and overcome the pain. In the future, Stephanie's family members have decided not to participate in interviews or television shows or answer questions. However, they have planned a final celebration. The day after the trial, Stephanie's family planned a gathering to remember her life on what would have been her 28th birthday, a birthday they would celebrate for the second time without her. They held a 3 p.m. tea party with peppermint cookies, which Stephanie's mother invited everyone to attend. In addition, the family is campaigning for stricter background checks and assessments for school staff in the hope of preventing incidents like the one that affected Stephanie and reducing the risk to students. After Stephanie's tragic death, the family suffered another tragic loss when her father, Robert, died in an accident involving a falling tree. He was buried near his daughter. Her boyfriend, Aaron, in an attempt to escape the painful memories of New South Wales, moved to Europe. However, he eventually found love again and became engaged to a woman named Samantha 5 years after Stephanie's death. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caitlin Arquette. Lois Duncan was born on April 28, 1934, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. Later, her family moved to Sarasota, Florida. Her mother and father specialized in circus photography, were famous photographers for popular magazines. From an early age, Lois spent a lot of time surrounded by artists, which inspired her. However, she did not want to pursue photography. Instead, she dreamed of becoming a writer. Lois turned out to be a real genius. At the age of 10, she wrote her first story, which was published in a children's magazine. By the age of 13, she managed to sell her first article, and the young talent became a regular contributor to newspapers and magazines. Lois graduated from high school in 1952 and was accepted to Duke University, where she met her first husband, Joseph Cardozo. However, she was forced to quit her studies in 1953 as she chose to start a family. Despite this, she continued her writing career and published more than 300 articles. In this relationship, she had 2 daughters named Robin and Carrie, and later, a son named Brett. After 10 years, the marriage ended, and she moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she began teaching at the journalism department of a local university. Despite lacking the appropriate education, one of her friends held a leadership position there, which allowed her to become a teacher. While substituting for the main teachers, Lois continued writing and authored 48 books that catered to audiences of all ages, but she gained the most fame for her thrillers for young adults. Her bestseller, I Know What You Did Last Summer, earned her the unofficial title of the Queen of the Teenage Thriller, a title used by many critics and journalists. She was recognized as an innovator in literature and received awards in 16 states and 3 additional countries, including the Edwards Award in 1992. Even before these events, in 1965, Lois married for the second time to an electrical engineer named Donald Arquette, who had a son, Donald Jr. During this marriage, a third daughter, Caitlin, was born. All of Lois's children were also very gifted and achieved success mainly in creative fields. By 1989, the 3 youngest children still lived with their mother and father in Albuquerque in a large, beautiful house in a prosperous area. Caitlin Arquette, whom relatives called Kate, was born on September 18, 1970. While she lacked a strong creative streak, she was very active and sociable in high school. Unlike her creative relatives, she wanted to become a doctor and worked hard to graduate from high school on June 14, 1989. By this time, she had been dating a guy named Dung Ngoc Nguyen for about a year and a half. He was an immigrant from Vietnam, and before moving to America, he often spoke about his difficult childhood and how emigration was an opportunity for him to build a better life than he had known in his homeland. Dung was 8 years older than Caitlin, but she lied to her family, saying he was only 4 years older, as her parents disapproved of their relationship due to the age difference. After finishing school, Caitlin got a job in a clothing store and was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of New Mexico. It was a pleasant summer, but her relationship with Dung began to have problems. On July 16, 1989, Caitlin visited her family and reported that her relationship with Dung was not going as well as she had hoped. She wanted to break up with him but hesitated, reluctant to return to her family's house because she enjoyed the apartment she was renting. Dung did not want to move out and behaved defiantly, justifying himself with Vietnamese traditions, which dictated that a woman must obey a man without question, a stance Caitlin refused to accept. Despite this, she was responsible for paying rent and utilities while Dung contributed nothing. When leaving her parents' house, Caitlin told them she was going to visit her friend Sharon, whom she had met shortly before but had already become close with. However, Caitlin's family did not know Sharon at all. Caitlin left her mother's number for contact and left home at 6:15 p.m., planning to go to Frozen first and then to Sharon's house. Everything seemed to be going well until around midnight when Lois and Donald received a call from a local emergency room. 18-year-old Caitlin had been brought to the hospital with injuries, but no relatives had been provided with any information. They were told to come to the hospital. It turned out that at about 11 p.m., a patrolman noticed 2 suspicious cars on the sidewalk and decided to investigate. He found Caitlin covered in blood, lying in the front seat of her car and moaning in pain. The girl's car was severely damaged, and it appeared that she had been involved in a road accident. The police officer called for backup and an ambulance. Once the authorities arrived, they noticed that the damage to the vehicle did not match the circumstances of an accident. Experienced investigators observed that the glass on the driver's side seemed to have been shattered by gunfire, as 2 bullets had pierced the driver's window and struck Caitlin in the head. The out-of-control car had driven through 3 lanes, veered into oncoming traffic, and stopped on the sidewalk against a lamppost. Caitlin was still alive but unable to speak. She was taken to the hospital in serious condition. By that time, the assumptions about the accident looked increasingly unconvincing. Judging by the injuries sustained, the position of the car, and its condition, it appeared that someone had attacked Caitlin and shot through the side window. She suffered 2 wounds to the head. Meanwhile, after receiving initial medical assistance, the girl was connected to life support machines by doctors. They informed her family that her chances of survival were minimal. The young man whom the police found at the scene of the tragedy was questioned and later released. He was considered a mere witness who had stopped to check on the condition of the victim. He did not arouse any suspicion and was released after the details were clarified. The officers then turned their attention to the victim. A note with the address of her friend, Sharon Smith, was found in her car. Considering the suspicion that the incident might have been an attack rather than an accident, the police decided to investigate this lead. At that time, according to Sharon, they had met around 9 p.m. and had dinner together. Caitlin was very upset, frequently crying and periodically calling her boyfriend, Dung. Seeing her distress, Sharon offered to stay with her, but she refused. Despite a bad feeling, Sharon could not force her friend to stay. Caitlin was determined to leave. She left at 10:45 p.m., heading toward her parents' house, where she intended to spend the night. After learning of the conflict between the victim and her boyfriend, detectives decided to verify this information and went to the couple's apartment at about 5 a.m. Dung opened the door, looking sleepy. It seemed he had just woken up and was unaware of what had happened. He appeared shocked by the news and stated that he had spent the evening with friends, playing billiards and drinking. He had returned to the apartment around 10 p.m., had been waiting for his girlfriend to come home, but when that didn't happen, he fell asleep. His friends confirmed his alibi. Officers decided to search the apartment for important clues. Dung consented to the inspection, and they noticed a note addressed to his girlfriend, which read, "Darling, where are you? I know you're still angry. I'm so sorry, I miss you. I went to your mother's to return some books. See you with love." According to him, no one had called him at home to inform him about what had happened. The detectives also inquired whether Dung owned a gun, considering Caitlin had been shot. However, the result was negative, and after concluding their investigation, the police officers left the apartment. Dung immediately rushed to the hospital to join the girl's worried relatives. According to Lois, she heard him mutter repeatedly that it was his fault. The doctors managed to stabilize Caitlin's condition, but they soon discovered that due to internal bleeding, her brain had died. Her life was being sustained only by a life support machine. Just a few hours after the incident, her relatives realized that Caitlin would never recover, leading them to make the difficult decision to take her off life support. She was declared dead on July 17, 1989, at the age of 18. Her mother knew that Caitlin would have wanted to donate her organs to those in need in the event of such an incident. This act helped save several lives. Meanwhile, detectives informed the family that they believed the incident to be an accidental shooting. In the area in recent months, there have been an increase in road-related attacks, raising the assumption that the victim might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Several gangs were operating in the area, feuding with each other and claiming territory. On June 24, a man was shot while sitting in his car, and a day later, during a road conflict, another man was killed with 3 stabs to the heart. On July 4, a third person was shot. The frequency of these attacks was alarming. Gang members would shoot at rival gang members, and it was possible that Caitlin's car was mistaken for one belonging to a competitor. However, Caitlin's relatives did not believe this theory proposed by the investigators, who continued to insist on focusing on the local rival gangs. As a result, writer Lois took the investigation into her own hands. During an impromptu investigation, she managed to uncover that 3 attacks had been committed on the day when they were all in the hospital, coinciding with the time Dung was with them. This suggested he could not have made a call himself. But if only 2 people lived in the apartment, who had made the calls? Lois sought to trace the origin of the calls and discovered that someone had tried to contact Dung's sister, who was living in California at the time. She had just arrived from Vietnam. The woman found out that the last time they were supposed to meet was in March of that year. The girl said that she went to Disneyland with her boyfriend. However, suspicions arose that both were involved in some criminal activity concerning the girl's mother, which all seemed incredible. She could not even imagine that a decent and educated daughter, who did not need anything, could be connected with a criminal guy. Curiously, the last call from the apartment was made just a minute after Caitlin was declared dead. During this time, Dung was still in the hospital next to his beloved and her family, so definitely could not have called. As it turned out, the trip to Disneyland was connected with machinations in which the Vietnamese community had been involved shortly before. These events were staged, and all the people who suffered in it complained of various injuries in the hope of receiving compensation through the court. Dung was part of this scheme and was supposed to receive money to settle the conflict. After finding out this information, Lois went to the police and told the investigator everything. She believed that this could have become a motive for the crime. In the meantime, Dung was very upset by Caitlin's death. One night, he unexpectedly came to Lois and asked for sleeping pills because he was having trouble sleeping. He insisted that she give him the whole pack. Of course, she refused, and from that moment on, she was seriously afraid that Dung could harm himself. She was not mistaken, because just 5 days after the tragedy, he took a knife and injured himself by stabbing himself in the stomach. Friends found him in time and took him to the hospital, where he survived. The police interrogated him because they believed he might feel guilty about his involvement in the crime. Dung insisted that he was in a state of loss and depression but was not involved in Caitlin's death. Lois believed he was not guilty of murder but suspected that Dung knew more than he was saying. It seemed that he was hiding something. The fear was confirmed by the victim's friend Sharon, who said that on the night of the murder, Dung called and said that Caitlin was dead. However, according to the time she indicated, this happened much earlier than when the police came to the apartment and notified him of what had happened. This means he was lying and clearly had an idea of what had occurred. In light of this news, investigators arrested him immediately after his hospital discharge. Dung denied saying anything like that. He insisted he did not know who could have killed Caitlin. He also denied participating in any fraudulent schemes to obtain money. The owner of the apartment where the couple lived provided valuable information. It turned out Caitlin did not have a peaceful life there. She repeatedly asked to change the locks and even to spend the night with a man because she was afraid to stay in the rented apartment. It seemed her fears were directed against her boyfriend. It appeared that the nice guy Dung was leading a double life of crime and was becoming a real tyrant towards Caitlin behind closed doors. A policeman was at the crime scene, and it later emerged he was himself involved in criminal activity. The officer was fired from the police department for participating in fraud and the resale of stolen cars. During the investigation, it was discovered that Vietnamese groups were involved in the theft of these cars. The owner of the auto repair shop, where the stolen cars were stored before selling, knew Caitlin. Circumstances were such that the innocent, smart girl Caitlin got involved with a guy who was entangled in criminal activity. However, there was not enough evidence to conclusively identify the criminal. On January 11, 1990, 6 months after Caitlin's death, a confidential informant contacted the police and reported that 4 men were involved in the brutality. Information was received from the local department, leading to the identification of 4 potential suspects, including a Mexican named Juvenal. However, she considered this version far-fetched. The police showed obvious negligence, as they did not even collect the glass fragments that were shot through and remained at the crime scene. At that point, it was revealed that many reports were fabricated based on real testimonies from witnesses. However, they were detained for a reason. The truck driver became an accidental witness to the massacre and described a car he saw on the road. The police found him in January at the wheel of the car in which the attackers were seated, including Juvenal Escobedo. Trouble arose when he said that the weapon was used by Miguel Garcia, while Robert Garcia and Dennis Martinez were also in the car. Robert was detained and taken to the police station on January 17, 1990. His interrogation lasted about 2 hours, during which he confessed to participating in the crime. Following this, the other 3 participants were arrested. Robert insisted that it was Miguel who pulled the trigger, killing Caitlin, claiming that he shot 3 times at Caitlin's car. Shortly before this, he had sold his Chevrolet Camaro, and he was recognized by the truck driver with whom the police spoke that night. Later, the Mexicans denied guilt and provided no commentary. Information about their involvement in the case fell through. Unexpectedly, Robert Garcia reported that he actually did not see anything. He insisted that during the interrogation, he was simply scared because the police pressured and threatened him, so he told them what they wanted to hear. Suspicion against Miguel led to the search of his house, where several units of weapons were found, but the pistol used to shoot Caitlin was not among them. The testimonies of several witnesses were also challenged, with people getting confused about the timeline. They could not say exactly what vehicle the criminals were in, and they even provided license plate numbers that did not match the Chevrolet Camaro. By the spring of 1991, all the detained young men who were considered involved in the murder were released, as all charges against them were dropped after it was proven that they were willing to confess to anything just to avoid the wrath of the authorities. After the release of the 4 main suspects, a decision was made to speak with Dung again. During this period, he was much more open and honestly admitted to committing insurance fraud. He also reported that at least 10 other Vietnamese individuals were involved in fraudulent schemes within the insurance sector. According to him, he had lied during his initial interrogation because a friend, whose name he refused to disclose, had told him to do so. Presumably, this friend had used the phone in the victim's apartment while Dung was not there. Lois feared that there would be attempts to suppress the truth. In 1992, she wrote a book titled Who Killed My Daughter? This work attracted significant attention from the public and the media. The author hoped that this would lead to someone coming forward with information about the tragedy to help the investigation. In 1995, Caitlin's case caught the attention of a private detective named Pat Caristo, a former police officer with extensive experience, who was considered one of the best detectives in the city. Pat discovered that the young man the police encountered when they arrived at the scene of the tragedy was 21-year-old Paul Apodaca. This was the same individual who claimed he had merely been passing by and wanted to help the victim. The police had only questioned him, taken his contact information, and allowed him to leave, but he did not seem so innocent to Pat. According to the private detective, Caitlin was a victim of a deliberate act. She had been intentionally pushed out of another car onto the road. Damage to the vehicle suggested that very similar damage could have been present on Paul's gray Volkswagen Beetle, but it was not documented. After that, Caitlin was shot. The detective found out that Paul had a stormy criminal past, and his friends noticed him painting his car just a few days after the accident, which seemed especially suspicious. However, what Pat said contradicted the official version of the police. Unfortunately, her words turned out to be insufficient. In 1997, a campaign was launched to get Caitlin's case re-investigated. Finally, in 2003, the Commission to Investigate Unsolved Crimes began its work. New investigators immediately confirmed the private detective's findings. They believed that the car had not been shot at while moving, but had first been pushed onto the sidewalk and caused to collide with a pole. However, there was too little information to find new leads. Lois was not going to give up. She was advised to contact a famous psychic named Betty Munn. Lois had no illusions about such a method but decided to try nevertheless. It helped to uncover new details. The psychic firmly stated that Dung did not kill Caitlin, but he perhaps knew who might have done it. The psychic saw another car that had stopped on the sidewalk after the accident, where 3 people were crowded together, arguing animatedly about something. They all appeared to be of Asian descent. The psychic insisted that the Vietnamese mafia, which operated in the area, was not involved in the murder. She claimed that the investigation was completely fabricated and that the police tried to shift all the blame onto 4 Mexicans. This was entirely consistent with Lois and the private detective's beliefs. The psychic could not provide more details, stating that it would not be possible to solve the crime until the killer revealed himself. Additionally, during the re-investigation, a large number of strange incidents surfaced, showing that people who might have had information were being persecuted. It appeared that someone was deliberately obstructing the investigation. Until 2003, all 4 individuals who could have been implicated as culprits were found dead under strange circumstances. Unfortunately, all lines of investigation turned out to be dead ends. In 2014, Lois wrote a sequel to her book about her daughter's death. By this time, her family had also received threats, and she was convinced that they were coming from a Vietnamese gang. After the book was published, Lois received more serious threats, which prompted her to transition to writing children's books and to stop writing about Caitlin's case. Lois spent the rest of her life trying to solve the mystery of her daughter's death. However, she was not destined to see this through. Lois died at the age of 82 on June 15, 2016. According to her husband, Lois suffered a series of strokes that might have been a contributing factor. Her relatives continued to pursue the case, striving for a resolution, but this did not lead to visible results until July 20, 2021, 32 years after Caitlin's death. On a warm summer day, police officers arrested a man who was wandering aimlessly around the grounds of the University of New Mexico. It turned out to be Paul Apodaca, the same man who had been seen by police near Caitlin's car. At the time of his arrest, he was 53 years old and had a long history of violent crimes, including abuse offenses. During interrogation, he admitted that he had felt a deep hatred for women throughout his life. It may have been a coincidence, but the psychic had predicted that one day a man would appear who would confess to the crime out of guilt. However, Paul's account started not with Caitlin, but with confessions to the abuses of several other girls in the 80s and 90s. His statements were thoroughly checked, and each confession took several months to verify. In the end, it was confirmed that the first victim of Paul's murder spree was Althea Oakley, who died on June 22, 1988, at the age of 21. Althea was returning alone after a party due to a quarrel with a guy when she was attacked. Paul stabbed her to death for no apparent reason upon seeing her on the street. A witness heard screams and ran into the street, but upon seeing the attack, he fled. Althea died in the hospital, and the criminal was never found. His next victim was 13-year-old Stella Gonzalez, who was walking with a friend in the morning of September 9, 1988. The attacker was driving by in a car when he noticed the girls. He pulled up and, without warning, shot one of them in the back of the head while the other ran away. All these cases remained unsolved for many years, but now Paul's involvement in them has been confirmed. The man was charged with the murders of these two girls in December 2021. In February 2022, the charge of murdering Caitlin was announced, to which he also confessed, providing police with details that only the criminal could know. Caitlin had become yet another random victim of his violence. His choice of victims was not justified by anything. He simply drove by, saw Caitlin's car, and decided to kill her. Paul stated that he would confess out of guilt that had tormented him all these years. He sincerely repented for the pain he caused to the families of the victims. Paul Apodaca is now in prison awaiting a hearing in January 2024. For one of the crimes, the serial killer received a sentence of 45 years in prison. The case of Caitlin Arquette is a haunting story of a young life cut short and a mother's relentless search for the truth. Initially thought to be a random gang attack, the case unraveled over decades, revealing Paul Apodaca, a violent drifter with a hatred for women, to be the real killer 32 years later. Caitlin's story is a poignant reminder that justice may be delayed but is not denied if we don't give up. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Emilia Alejandra Benavides Cuenca. Emilia Alejandra Benavides Cuenca was a 9-year-old girl living in Loja, Ecuador, with her family and younger sisters in 2017. On the evening of Thursday, December 14th, she attended school as usual and began making a handmade Christmas gift for her parents. She left the unfinished gift on the table, planning to complete it after returning home. Emilia followed the same daily routine on school days. After finishing her classes, she would walk past a pastry shop to reach the bus stop, which was only about 100 meters away. After boarding the bus, she would typically arrive home at around the same time every evening. However, on December 15, 2017, something was different. When Emilia failed to return home and was delayed by over an hour, her family began to grow concerned. She was not the type to visit friends or deviate from her routine without permission. Ecuador faces a serious crime problem, and Loja is no exception. However, it is considered to be safer than many other parts of the country. Emilia's parents still hope that she will return soon and have a reasonable explanation for being late home. However, as time passed, their concern deepened. Her family started contacting people, hoping that she might have gone to visit someone, even though this would have been unusual for her. By then, all her classmates had already returned home, but Emilia was still missing. Emilia's disappearance sent her family into panic. Her parents went to her school to speak with her teacher and try to figure out where she might have gone. However, by the time they arrived, Emilia's class teacher had already left. Initially, it was unclear whether she had attended class or when she had gone missing. After contacting other teachers, it was confirmed that she had attended school that day. The principal then reviewed footage from the school's surveillance cameras, which showed Emilia studying throughout the day as expected. After classes ended, she left the school and followed her usual route home. No one was seen accompanying her or picking her up. Unfortunately, much of the area surrounding Emilia's route was not captured by security cameras. Along the path was a small confectionery shop, and the owner, Vlada, reviewed footage from his shop's cameras. The recordings showed Emilia entering the shop after classes on Friday, December 15th, at around 12:30 p.m. The owner, who was also the shopkeeper, spoke with Emilia's parents and confirmed that she had come to the store. The little girl wanted to buy candy but was 5 cents short, which was the amount she needed for the bus ride home. She promised to repay the 5 cents on Monday. The shop owner, Vlada, explained that he let Amelia buy the candy anyway, as she had been polite and he didn't want to refuse her. He added that he himself was a father and understood how important small gestures could be. Unfortunately, he was the last known person to see Amelia before she vanished. What happened to Amelia after she left the shop remained a mystery. Her family immediately contacted her closest friends, neighbors, and teachers for help. Together, they spread information about her disappearance through social networks and WhatsApp chats to aid in the search. In addition, they promptly contacted the police to report Amelia as missing. Right from the beginning, the investigators approached the case with utmost seriousness, suspecting that it could potentially be a kidnapping. That evening, Amelia was officially added to the list of over 4,000 people who had disappeared in Ecuador. The pastry shop owner, Vlada, quickly became a person of interest. However, detectives refrained from making accusations and instead questioned him. He repeated the same account he had shared with Amelia's parents. After the investigation, Vlada showed no suspicious signs. He is a respectable man who lives for his family, runs a small business, and has no connection to any criminal activities. His shop was thoroughly searched, including storage areas, but no evidence or clues were found. Detectives then turned their attention to the city's network of surveillance cameras managed by the municipality. Unfortunately, the cameras were non-functional, rendering them useless. This setback added to the complexity of the case and forced investigators to reassess their next steps. Detectives contacted the management of various small and large businesses to obtain surveillance footage from cameras installed on the facades of private organizations and banks. Fortunately, everyone cooperated and provided the necessary recordings. Eventually, they discovered footage of a girl resembling Amelia. However, questions remained: had Amelia reached the bus stop, or had she been intercepted along the way? The tape showed her turning the corner after leaving a pastry shop and then vanishing, effectively ruling out the pastry shop owner, Vlada, as a suspect. Vlada was immediately declared innocent and even participated in the search for Amelia by helping to distribute information regarding her disappearance. Unfortunately, no new leads emerged until Monday. Many of the cameras in the area were either non-functional or poorly positioned, and failed to capture the section of the street where Amelia was last seen. Law enforcement, Amelia's family, and locals collaborated to spread awareness about her disappearance. Surveillance footage from Amelia's school provided a clearer description of her appearance. She was wearing her school uniform, a white t-shirt and blue leggings, with her hair tied back and a backpack on her shoulders. The following day, Amelia's parents appeared on television, pleading with the public and urging anyone with information to contact authorities. Shortly after, a march was organized, led by Amelia's parents. Her father, Angel, walked at the front while holding a large photograph of his smiling 9-year-old daughter. By Monday, the same events had repeated, but no progress had been made. Classes resumed at Amelia's school, but during a lesson, one of her classmates stood up and declared he couldn't focus while Amelia's desk remained empty. The boy insisted on joining the search efforts, and the other children were allowed to participate. This incident provoked a strong public response, motivating many others to volunteer in the search. Unfortunately, these efforts yielded no new information. Amelia's parents searched tirelessly for their daughter, speaking to anyone who might know about her disappearance. Despite their persistence, Amelia's mother took no solace in their efforts. Only one theory seemed plausible, but it was so distressing that the family refused to consider it. Amelia was a quiet, obedient child. She excelled in school, never stayed out late, avoided bad influences, and always asked permission before going anywhere. She was cautious around strangers and avoided people who seemed suspicious. Loya was considered a safe town, free from crime, and Amelia's circle of friends included no questionable individuals. Despite the uncertainty, her parents clung to hope. The crucial 48-hour window had already passed, but no useful clues had surfaced. In an effort to reach as many people as possible and find potential witnesses, Amelia's relatives turned to the internet. They created a page dedicated to their missing 9-year-old, sharing information that quickly spread not only across Ecuador but also internationally. Despite the growing worry, hope for Emilia's safe return remained alive until December 19, 2017. On that day, a crucial video surfaced, recorded by a store's security camera located on the outskirts of Loya. The footage showed a girl matching Emilia's description, dressed in her school uniform and carrying a backpack, walking calmly alongside a man. The two appeared to be conversing as they approached a road, where the girl willingly entered an unidentified taxi. The girl's behavior suggested she was not afraid of the man. Their interaction appeared familiar and non-threatening. It seemed Emilia trusted him, likely believing he was someone she knew. This led investigators to focus on people within her close circle. When the video was shown to Emilia's mother, she immediately recognized the man and confirmed his identity with her husband, who also knew him. Authorities arrested the suspect that same day for questioning. The detainee was identified as Jose Fabian Nero Robelino, a man who is known to members of Emilia's family. He quickly became the primary suspect in the kidnapping. When his identity was revealed, there was a fleeting sense of hope, but it was short-lived. Investigators showed Jose a photo of the pastry seller, but he claimed not to recognize them. However, he soon confessed that he knew Emilia and her family. He was acquainted with her parents, as he occasionally worked with them. Emilia's father, Angel Cuenca, ran a small business organizing events and dance therapy sessions, where Jose occasionally worked as an instructor. This is how he became acquainted with Emilia. Their relationship was close enough for her to trust him, which allowed him to carry out his sinister plan without resistance. Initially, Jose denied any wrongdoing, but he eventually confessed to murdering Emilia and agreed to lead detectives to her remains. On the outskirts of Loya, near a roadside, investigators discovered human remains that were unrecognizable. Forensic analysis confirmed they belonged to Emilia. By then, Emilia's tragic disappearance had drawn national attention. Everyone who participated in the search and raised awareness about her case was horrified by the brutality of this horrific crime. By December 20th, just one day after Emilia's body was discovered, the horrifying details of this tragedy had emerged, revealing an entire criminal syndicate. Just prior to the kidnapping, another member of the group reached out to Jose, requesting that he find a girl aged between 10 and 12 to record the abuse as per the instructions of a wealthy client. The syndicate had agreed to pay $4,000 for the kidnapping. Jose had already studied Emilia's daily routine and determined she would be an easy target. Jose waited for Emilia after school, choosing a spot out of sight of the security cameras to meet her. He told her that her father was waiting for her at a country hotel and had prepared a delightful surprise. Trusting him, she agreed without a doubt, and they headed towards his car. She trusted him so much that they walked part of the way holding hands. Jose then took Emilia to a remote area on the city's outskirts, where she was to be handed over to the client. During questioning, he confessed that the plan was initially limited to taking photos and recording videos. They had no intention of killing her and had planned to return her home afterward. However, the crime quickly attracted significant attention the following day. The client delayed returning Emilia, and in the meantime, the police, along with tens of thousands of volunteers, had begun an extensive search. Jose realized that returning Emilia without raising suspicion was impossible, so he accepted that the consequences were unavoidable. Jose kept Emilia hostage for approximately a day, contemplating his next move before eventually deciding to kill her. The clients who had orchestrated the kidnapping showed no concern for Emilia's fate but made it clear to Jose that he would be killed if their criminal activities were revealed. Meanwhile, other members of the syndicate had already sent photos and videos of Emilia to the client, received payment, compensated the kidnapper, and uploaded the materials onto the darknet. They operated a website showcasing similar content, including videos of dozens of child abuse cases. The website had a simple name, 10, representing the number of syndicate members involved. Despite his guilt, Jose refused to implicate others, fearing retribution from the syndicate. Investigators examined his social media accounts and mobile phone, uncovering connections to another syndicate member, a taxi driver named Manuel, who had transported Emilia from Elchin, located on the outskirts of the city. Further investigation revealed that a third individual, Tanya Yulexi Ramona Zanza, had also been directly involved in the crime. Tanya was willing to cooperate fully with the authorities but stipulated that she would testify only if granted reliable protection, as she feared retaliation from the syndicate. By this time, Emilia's abduction video had gone viral on the dark net, causing widespread outrage among Ecuadorians. When families and parents learned of the incident, they quickly discovered the whereabouts of the arrested criminals. Fueled by a thirst for justice, tensions escalated. Emilia was only 9 years old when she was killed. An autopsy revealed her final hours had been horrifyingly brutal. Disturbingly, one of the perpetrators, Jose, was not just a dance therapy teacher. He often worked as an entertainer at children's parties, potentially scouting for victims. People who knew Jose described him as responsible and kind. His social media portrayed a wholesome image, with his profile picture showing him smiling alongside his children. This facade allowed him to appear trustworthy while secretly using his profession and public persona to prey on children. Jose stated that he had been coerced and threatened by a criminal group, which forced him to reveal information about the victims' whereabouts, otherwise, his children would be put in danger. Local residents were outraged and began hunting down the trio of criminals involved, Jose, Manuel, and Tanya. Crowds even gathered outside the police station where the suspects were being interrogated. Men, women, and teenagers armed with sticks demanded justice and nearly stormed the station. Authorities barely managed to prevent the mob from breaking in. Evidence from confessions revealed that the group had been kidnapping children and producing videos and photographs of the abuse of minors for years. Due to the volatile situation, police quickly arranged to transfer the suspects to another prison. However, information was clearly leaked. During the transfer, another crowd armed with sticks gathered on the street, waiting for the criminals. Police managed to escort them away safely, preventing a lynching. This provoked even greater outrage among local residents, who demanded justice and accused the authorities of showing leniency toward the murderers, especially considering the police's earlier failure to protect so many children. The incident caused such public outrage that the president had to address the nation directly on television, emphasizing the need for a thorough investigation into Emilia's case and the children involved. Early the next morning, at around 5:30 a.m., Jose was discreetly transferred to a new correctional facility located 200 kilometers away from Loya. This early transfer was intended to prevent the crowd from attacking and lynching him during transport. At 7:15 a.m., the detainees gathered for breakfast, but Jose was not in his cell. Strangely, no one seemed to notice. When guards checked the cell, Jose was discovered dead. The death certificate said he had died, although the investigation into his cause of death was cursory. Jose had been restrained on specialized beds with chains inside the cell, and it was on one of these beds that he died. Few details were explored, but it was suspected to be an act of revenge by another criminal group. Despite Jose being the main suspect in the kidnapping, murder, and torture of Emilia, authorities had already obtained all necessary information from him, so his death was not considered a major loss. Following this incident, the president urged the Ministry of Internal Affairs to strengthen protections for Manuel and Tanya, the remaining suspects in this high-profile case, in order to prevent further deaths. The goal was to uncover the entire network and ensure justice for all involved. The interrogations of Manuel and Tanya continued throughout January and February 2018, aiding in the identification of a significant number of the organization's participants. By March 16, 2018, charges had been filed against 18 individuals connected to the group. A major discovery resulted from the analysis of Jose's electronic devices. Investigators uncovered mobile phone data and correspondence with other syndicate members, which helped reveal the pseudonym and potential location of the group's organizer. However, the leader's true identity remained unknown, and efforts to uncover it were unsuccessful. Authorities searched all known addresses and conducted raids but eventually realized the organizer had fled. Due to a lack of concrete information, officials were unable to issue an official warrant or identify the leader, leaving uncertainty about who they needed to pursue. Various rumors began circulating, accusing law enforcement agencies of collaborating with criminal groups. Some even speculated that high-ranking officials within the police and government were involved. During the investigation, authorities discovered that the criminal network operated across multiple cities in Ecuador, including Quito, Puerto Viejo, and Santo Domingo de los Zacales. As part of a large-scale operation conducted by the National Police, 18 members of the syndicate were arrested. Additional individuals connected to the top leaders of the criminal organization were found living in the city of Loya. These individuals, who were noticeably wealthy, resided in luxurious homes that starkly contrasted with the impoverished slums where many locals lived. Their lavish lifestyles were clearly financed through illicit activities. The raids uncovered significant evidence, including dozens of computer hard drives and mobile phones containing incriminating material. Investigators spent weeks analyzing the data, uncovering equipment used for storing, recording, and distributing videos and photos. The syndicate's operations followed a straightforward but sinister pattern. They targeted vulnerable children, often from dysfunctional families where neglect was common. In such families, parents frequently failed to notice their child's prolonged absence. The group operated swiftly and avoided killing their victims, but Emilia's case stood out. Her family was not poor, but she was chosen because she was deemed suitable to be targeted as a victim. Jose, a member of the group, who had a close relationship with Emilia, exploited this opportunity. The syndicate committed their crimes in locations such as hotel rooms or country houses owned by their members. They exploited children, recording horrifying acts that were subsequently sold for large sums of money and shared on darknet platforms. Nearly 20 individuals were apprehended during the operation. However, the key leaders of the group, operating from various cities, managed to evade capture and disappeared across the country. Law enforcement efforts had minimal effect on improving the overall situation. According to confessions from members of the criminal network, they primarily recruited teenagers and children through a social media page called Inocentes 10, which functioned similarly to their main website. For payments ranging from $1,000 to $5,000, they identified and targeted victims. In some cases, kidnappers were not even required. Older minors could simply be coerced or convinced. Teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds often agreed to participate willingly in exchange for money. The most shocking and high-profile incident was the murder of Emilia, with her parents being the sole voices to raise alarm and mobilize the country. Initially, Tanya and Manuel were sentenced to 34 years in prison. However, after their crimes were reviewed collectively, the sentences were extended to 40 years under Ecuadorian law. Still, the punishment failed to reflect the full severity of their cruel acts. The prosecutor's office had requested the maximum penalty allowed by law, but activists argued even that was insufficient for the perpetrators to fully comprehend the gravity of their offenses. The court ultimately denied these demands, stating, "The law is the law." Following this, the Cuenca family spearheaded the creation of the Emilia Law, aimed at strengthening Ecuador's criminal legislation by introducing harsher penalties for severe crimes, including life imprisonment, punishments that had not previously existed in the country. However, the proposal stalled during its review process and has not been fully incorporated into Ecuadorian law. To date, no legal changes have been made, and the Supreme Court's maximum sentence remains at 40 years. In many cases, convicted individuals continue to retain the possibility of release. The issue of protecting children, especially girls, in Ecuador remains unresolved, with crimes continuing to occur at an alarming rate. Statistics show an unsettling frequency of incidents, including brutal murders, happening nearly every 2 days. In response, the Cuenca family also initiated the Emilia Protocol, which is currently being refined by the Ministry of the Interior. Several strategies have already been introduced to improve responses to and searches for missing children. Ecuador will be the first country in South America to adopt such a system. According to Emilia's family, this initiative could inspire similar measures across the continent. Under this initiative, whenever a disappearance is reported in the media or on social networks, information about the missing person is promptly shared. This approach resembles the Amber Alert system used in the US and was implemented during the search for Emilia. Unfortunately, the methodology was underdeveloped and failed to save her. However, the system does have its limitations. To date, the Amelia protocol has only been activated a few times, despite a higher number of people going missing. Currently, authorities are revising the criteria to better evaluate the level of threat and enable quicker responses. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Catherine Louise Odom. Catherine Louise Odom was born on October 25, 1959, in a suburb of Houston, Texas, USA. She grew up in a warm and loving family. Her father worked as an engineer, while her mother was a school teacher. Their family was well respected in the community, and all the neighbors knew them. Catherine was the eldest of the siblings and had two younger brothers, Mike and Stephen, as well as a younger sister, Shelley. The children shared a close bond from an early age. Shelley, being significantly younger than Catherine, admired her older sister and often mimicked her. Catherine helps Shelley with her studies and provides encouragement for her interests. The sisters shared several hobbies, which strengthened their connection further. Both were athletic and passionate about gymnastics. Catherine excelled academically, thanks to an environment of mutual love and encouragement, which contributed to her educational success. Besides sports, she had a deep appreciation for art and often spent her spare time helping others. During high school, Catherine joined several charitable organizations. It was around this time that she met a young man named Mike Odom. They had a lot in common and so began a romantic relationship that lasted even after graduation. A few years later, they decided to get married and settle in a peaceful neighborhood to build a cozy home for their future family. Everyone could see how happy they were after their wedding, as if they had been born to meet each other. It could be said that everything had been arranged by fate. Catherine and Mike's lives changed significantly when their daughter, Tasha, was born. Catherine embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, realizing it was her true calling. She focused entirely on caring for their child, while Mike worked hard to support their growing family. He had a job at a small company installing road signs, which was owned by Catherine's father and provided a stable income. They lived comfortably and lacked for nothing. 3 years later, Catherine became pregnant again, this time with a boy. In January 1987, at the age of 27, she gave birth to their son, Sean. Filled with renewed energy, Catherine devoted herself to creating a loving and comfortable home for her family. She spent most of her time at home, as working wasn't necessary. Meanwhile, Mike maintained a busy work schedule but made an effort to spend all of his free time with Catherine and the children. On rare occasions, he would meet friends at bars. Catherine's parents frequently visited their daughter and grandchildren, further strengthening family bonds. Her younger sister Shelley, now married to Gregory Glenn Marquardt, also visited often. During these gatherings, they enjoyed family picnics or explored popular spots in the city, creating cherished memories together. Catherine was lively and full of energy, taking charge of most organizational matters concerning family leisure and daily life. She managed these tasks willingly, with support from her husband and relatives. Catherine and her husband, Mike, have worked together to overcome common challenges in family life. Their close partnership enabled them to work through problems together, which made their family life appear ideal to those around them. They often expressed their confidence in facing challenges hand in hand. Sadly, their happiness did not last long. On March 3, 1987, the day started out like any other. Catherine stayed home with the children, taking care of household chores, while Mike left for work in the morning. He had arranged with Catherine to spend the evening with friends in the city and return home later than usual. After his shift, Mike called home, as planned, to confirm his evening plans and check on his family. However, no one answered the phone, a surprising and concerning situation, since Catherine typically stayed home and was reachable. On rare occasions, she would leave the house, but always briefly and with the children. Mike assumed that Catherine might have gone to the nearby store, just a few minutes' walk from their house. He waited about 10 minutes before trying to call her several more times, but she didn't answer. Since it was a weekday and she usually stayed at home, he started to worry. It was unusual and unsettling for her not to respond. After about half an hour, Mike decided to contact his neighbor, Tim and ask him to help check on Catherine. Without hesitation, Tim agreed and headed to Mike's house. When Tim arrived, he knocked on the door, but there was no response. The house was eerily silent, and it looked suspiciously dark inside. Peeking through the living room window, Tim noticed that the lights and TV were off, and the house seemed completely still, as though no one was inside. This was highly unusual because Catherine was almost always at home with her children on weekdays, either inside or in the yard. Neither Mike nor Tim had ever experienced anything like this before, and Tim grew increasingly concerned, suspecting that something might have happened to Catherine. Rather than returning home to make more phone calls, Tim decided to act quickly. He got into his car and drove into the city, hoping to find a police patrol car. After driving a few kilometers, he spotted one, flagged it down, and informed the officers about the unusual situation. Tim then guided the officers back to the house. Upon arrival, the officers knocked on the door, but, just like before, there was no response. While debating whether they should break down the door, one officer accidentally touched the handle and discovered that the door was unlocked all along. Inside, an ominous silence filled the house. The atmosphere felt heavy and foreboding. As the officers entered, they immediately encountered a troubling sight. A young girl named Tasha was lying unconscious on the couch. Although she was alive, she appeared to have suffered a severe attack, likely resulting in a skull or brain injury. The officers promptly called for an ambulance. The search continued, and they feared the situation might be more dire than just an assault on a child. In the bedroom, the officers thankfully found some relief. Baby Sean was peacefully sleeping in his crib, completely unharmed. However, this moment of comfort was short-lived. Their next discovery revealed the horrifying depth of the tragedy and raised questions that would baffle investigators for years. In the master bedroom, they discovered Catherine lying naked on the floor, covered in blood. Her hands were bound with the cord of an electric lamp, and she had been fatally stabbed multiple times. When the police found her, she was dead. Paramedics arrived and immediately rushed Tasha to the hospital for urgent medical attention. Meanwhile, detectives began their investigation, and forensic teams meticulously combed the crime scene for evidence to piece together what had happened. At this point, the circumstances surrounding the tragedy were a complete mystery, and the family had not yet been informed. When Catherine's father, Frank Martin, was notified about the incident, he rushed to the family home. However, he was prevented from entering the house and was detained by the authorities. Under the guise of preserving the crime scene for forensic investigation, the police appeared to be shielding him from the horrifying details of his daughter's murder. Instead, they directed him to the hospital to be with his granddaughter and provide her comfort. Learning about Tasha's critical condition, he immediately headed to the medical center. At the hospital, deeply worried about Tasha, Frank desperately sought answers. Upon arrival, he was informed that Tasha was still in surgery, so he waited in the emergency room, unaware of the full tragedy that had unfolded at his daughter's home. While trying to gather information from the staff, a news report aired on television in the waiting room. It was through this broadcast that he learned the horrifying truth. The report revealed that in a Houston suburb, a woman had been killed, and her daughter was critically injured and hospitalized. Frank quickly realized the story was about Catherine and Tasha. Based on the broadcast, fear gripped him as he began to worry he might lose his granddaughter as well. The shocking revelation left him reeling. Mike was in complete shock upon hearing the news and struggled to comprehend who could have harmed his loved ones. When he finally arrived home, his presence immediately drew the attention of the authorities. There were several reasons for their suspicion. First, they noticed suspicious stains resembling blood on his shirt. Additionally, he arrived much later than expected, even after Catherine's father. Detectives confiscated Mike's clothes for testing and took him to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, the police continued investigating the crime scene, uncovering significant evidence. A large amount of blood was discovered in the bathroom, suggesting the attacker had attempted to clean themselves and had spent considerable time in the house before leaving. Based on this, investigators concluded that the motive was not robbery. Instead, the attacker likely knew Catherine and had been aware of when she would be most vulnerable. The primary motive for the attack was identified as abuse. Detectives confirmed that the killer was someone Catherine knew, as evidenced by the lack of any signs of forced entry on the windows or doors, and the fact that the main entrance had been unlocked. Investigators proposed two scenarios: either Catherine knew the attacker, trusted him, and let him in willingly without anticipating harm, or the attacker had a key to the house and entered without difficulty. A notable observation was that Catherine's clothes were neatly folded on the floor next to her naked body. Additionally, investigators believed Tasha was not the intended target of the attack. Instead, the attacker either harmed Tasha to force Catherine into submission or struck the girl on the head to silence an unintended witness. Tasha was hospitalized and unable to provide valuable information to the police due to the severity of her injuries. Tragically, the delay in medical assistance significantly reduced her chances of survival. Tasha suffered multiple blows to her head and body, consistent with injuries caused by fists. The severe injuries underscored the attacker's extreme cruelty. The child was beaten so severely that doctors struggled for hours to stabilize her. Ultimately, she fell into a coma. Her relatives were informed that her chances of survival were slim, though there remained a slight hope for recovery. Meanwhile, forensic experts conducted an autopsy on Catherine's body and revealed 26 stab wounds, mostly concentrated in the abdominal area, a pattern considered unusual for a murder. Investigators reviewed similar cases and examined evidence to determine if she had been a victim of abuse. They succeeded in obtaining biological material from the perpetrator. However, DNA analysis in the late 1980s was in its infancy, slow, rarely used, and technologically undeveloped. At that time, testing could only determine the attacker's blood type, far from today's advanced capabilities. This vital clue significantly narrowed down the list of suspects. The police's primary focus shifted to Catherine's husband, Mike. Detectives viewed his behavior as suspicious. After work, rather than going straight home despite the concerning silence from his wife, he chose to meet with friends. Additionally, instead of checking on his wife himself, he sent a neighbor to their house. To the detectives, this suggested an attempt to create an alibi and mislead the investigation. Seasoned investigators were familiar with similar behavior in past cases. Upon examining Mike's claims, the police confirmed his alibi, though it did not account for the entire period he was away from home on the day of the murders. Their findings indicated that Mike had the opportunity to harm Catherine and their daughter during the time between noon and his visit to the bar to meet friends. Suspicions deepened when detectives delved into Mike's past. They discovered that after high school, he had run into legal trouble for selling a prohibited substance and had received a suspended sentence. Although the previous incident did not involve violence, it still raised suspicions about Mike and further strengthened investigators' theories. The incident had directly postponed Catherine and Mike's wedding. After Mike resolved his legal issues, he and Catherine got married, but then decided to live apart. While there was no history of assault or violence connected to him, the investigators appeared determined to implicate him, though he consistently denied any guilt. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him with murder or attempted murder. To gather more details, detectives questioned the next person connected to the case, the neighbor, Tim, who had alerted the police. Tim's actions raised suspicions, as he had unnecessarily driven around town to find a police patrol instead of simply going home and calling emergency services to check on Catherine's condition. During a search of his car, investigators discovered dark, suspicious stains on the floor mats that appeared to be blood. These samples, along with Tim's clothing and t-shirt, were sent for forensic analysis. At this point, the police had two main suspects and even speculated that they might have been working together. However, confirming a motive for the crime proved challenging. After the forensic expert completed his work, he determined that Catherine had died around 1 p.m., approximately 6 hours before she was discovered. This timeline allowed the detectives to compare the statements of Mike and Tim regarding their whereabouts. Both men claimed they were at work during the day, and their alibis were confirmed. However, the forensic examination results were still pending. 2 days later, the hospital provided an update. Tasha had fortunately emerged from her coma, and doctors confirmed her life was no longer in danger. Police were eager to speak with the child, considering her a crucial witness in the case. But when they arrived at the hospital, their hopes of identifying the criminal were dashed. The 4-year-old girl had lost most of her memory and was unable to recall the incident that occurred at the family home. All she could recall was that an unfamiliar man had entered the house during the day. This clue proved to be crucial, as it led the authorities to suspect that a third party might be involved in the violent attack. It was clear the girl could identify her father and neighbor unless they had drastically changed their appearance. Although the police didn't completely dismiss them as suspects, their focus on Mike and Tim significantly decreased after this. Psychologists worked diligently with Tasha, aiming to help her not only recover from the trauma but also remember the events of that horrific day. Forensic analysis revealed that the stains on Tim's car mats were from machine oil, whereas the stains on Mike's shirt were from red paint. Moreover, both men's alibis were confirmed by multiple witnesses, proving they couldn't have been at the house during the attack on Catherine and Tasha. The police were prepared to clear them of suspicion completely. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when both Mike and Tim failed a polygraph test. The results indicated they were lying, which reignited doubts and suspicion. By this point, investigators were exploring other possibilities. Despite conducting extensive interviews with Catherine's friends and family, no one identified Mike or Tim as possible suspects. Neither man appeared to have a motive for attacking Catherine, nor did they come across as aggressive or dangerous. However, Shelley, Catherine's younger sister, frequently mentioned that Catherine had repeatedly complained about a particular individual. This person exhibited obsessive behavior and made unannounced visits, especially when Mike was away. These encounters made Catherine deeply uncomfortable. The person in question turned out to be Gregory, Shelley's husband, who openly flirted with Catherine, made inappropriate comments about her appearance, and even suggested intimacy. He seemed to be fixated on her figure, particularly her abdomen, which took on a chilling significance considering her eventual death from stab wounds to the abdomen. Upon further investigation, detectives uncovered that Gregory had used a heavy prohibited substance and possessed a significant criminal record. His history included petty thefts but also assaults, raising serious concerns. The police found a fingerprint in Catherine's house that matched Gregory's, as his fingerprints were already in their database from previous cases. Gregory explained that he had been in the house before, so finding his fingerprints or hair there wasn't unusual. However, everyone close to Catherine was convinced that he had been involved in the attack, or that he was possibly the one who had committed it. No other suspicious individuals were linked to Catherine. A notable incident reinforced these suspicions. One night, while Catherine's parents were at the hospital with Tasha, Gregory unexpectedly showed up. His timing seemed odd, and Tasha reacted with immediate fear. She clung to her grandmother, trembling and visibly tense until Gregory left. Although she had barely interacted with him before, her extreme reaction caused Catherine's parents to become certain that Gregory was the man responsible for their daughter's death. Gregory was a reserved and unsociable man with peculiar behavior. The police decided to bring him in for questioning. From the start, he appeared nervous and irritable during the interrogations. When asked whether he had agreed to meet the police voluntarily, he denied any involvement in Catherine's murder. He claimed that he couldn't have been at her house at the time of the crime because he was with his friend. However, sensing that the authorities were closing in on him, Gregory interrupted the conversation to ask for permission to go to the parking lot and extend his car's payment to avoid being towed. The detectives allowed him to leave, but instead of returning, Gregory fled. His escape didn't particularly shock the police, as they had already suspected he was guilty. Suspicion against Gregory, now the prime suspect, quickly grew stronger. Shelley, Catherine's younger sister, informed the police that Gregory had driven her to work at 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., which left him with a 4-hour window aligning perfectly with Catherine's time of death. Forensic evidence later revealed that the materials found under Catherine's fingernails matched Gregory's blood type. However, since DNA analysis was still in its infancy and not widely utilized at the time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with the crime. Despite this, Catherine's family was convinced that Gregory was involved in the attack. Shelley, on the other hand, does not believe he is guilty and continues to live with him, despite facing opposition from her family. The case remained unsolved for 11 years until detectives revisited the evidence in 1998, leveraging significant advancements in DNA technology. Despite the improvements, the DNA analysis still lacked precision. The samples collected from Catherine could only match 2% of the global population, which included Gregory. This limitation was due to the partial DNA profile that could be isolated. Nonetheless, detectives saw an opportunity and questioned Gregory again. They informed him of the partial match between his DNA and DNA found on Catherine's body. Surprisingly, Gregory changed his testimony from 11 years earlier, admitting that he had an affair with Catherine. He claimed to have visited her on the day she passed away, saying that they had an intimate relationship while her children were in another room. According to Gregory, Catherine was alive when he left. However, Gregory's new story contradicted what Catherine had said when she was alive. She had voiced her fear of him and complained about him. It also clashed with what her relatives knew about her character, as they were certain she would never leave her young children unattended. Despite Gregory's sudden change in his account and the detectives' growing suspicions, the lack of accuracy in the DNA analysis left them without enough evidence to proceed. The investigation was restarted in 2002 when a new forensic expert joined the case. This expert conducted groundbreaking research on DNA, assisted by a specialized team. They experimented by applying varying levels of pressure to each other's necks and analyzing the DNA traces left behind. Their research demonstrated that sufficient DNA particles remain on a victim's body during such interactions, enabling forensic examination. Detectives learned about a method to collect skin particles left on surfaces through touch. This sparked the idea to re-examine the evidence from the crime scene to identify objects that the attacker might have touched and recover potential DNA traces. The most obvious choice was the cord from the electric lamp that the attacker had used to tie up Catherine before torturing her, and this decision proved successful. On the lamp cord, investigators discovered a small amount of genetic material that perfectly matched Gregory's DNA. 15 years after the brutal crime, Gregory was finally arrested and held accountable for his actions. Gregory later contacted authorities and confessed to the murder, even boasting about it. He provided a detailed account of the horrific incident involving Catherine's abuse and murder. On the day of the crime, after taking Shelley to work, Gregory consumed a large quantity of prohibited substances before visiting Catherine's home. Upon arriving, he began harassing her, who demanded that he leave. Gregory then turned to Tasha and struck her multiple times on the head with his fist, causing her to collapse. Catherine screamed, begging him to leave their home and spare their lives. Gregory threatened to kill Tasha if Catherine did not comply. He then proceeded to tie her hands, abuse her, and inflict knife wounds. After committing the violent acts, he cleaned up the blood in the bathroom, changed out of his bloody clothes to avoid leaving evidence in his car, and then drove away. Gregory eventually admitted that his actions were driven by intense, unrequited feelings for Catherine. In a fit of rage, he committed the murder. In 2004, Gregory Glenn Marquardt faced trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he had already confessed. There was no doubt about his guilt. He was convicted of the first-degree murder of Catherine and the attempted first-degree murder of Tasha. Due to his confession, the judge reduced his sentence, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. However, Gregory served only a fraction of his sentence. After spending just 4 years in prison, he died of liver cancer at the age of 56. Shelley was devastated to realize that she had spent 15 years believing in a man who turned out to be a monster, a man who had killed her sister and nearly taken her niece's life. Catherine's children remained with their father, Mike, and Catherine's family offered their support to him and the children during this difficult time. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Julie Jensen. Mark Jensen was a successful man, a husband and father from the quiet, cozy town of Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, USA, with a population of about 20,000 people. This typical suburb is safe, featuring many parks and walking trails. Mark worked as a broker, achieved success in this field. His career allowed him to provide a comfortable life for himself and his family. Additionally, he had quite flexible working conditions. Mark could take a vacation at any time, enjoying good privileges all thanks to his successful work. Mark was married to Julie, whom he met in 1981. They began dating in the spring of 1981 and then got married. Julie worked as a salesperson in a store. Their first child, named David, was born in 1990, and their second, Douglas, was born in 1995. After Douglas's birth, Julie decided to leave her job and become a housewife. Her husband's income was more than enough to provide for the entire family, allowing her to become an ideal mother for her boys. From the outside, their married life looked perfect. However, since 1991, they struggled with a serious problem that haunted Julie for the next 7 years. It began with an incident that felt like a bad joke. The first time she received someone else's candid photo stuck in her front door, no one paid any attention to it. However, similar incidents began to happen repeatedly, and later, emails with suspicious content appeared. Calls started coming to their home phone, but the unknown caller would simply remain silent and hang up after a few seconds. Checking the number was ineffective, as it could not be tracked. Julie tried to ignore the unpleasant episodes, sending the letters to spam and hanging up when the caller remained silent. But everything began to repeat itself in real life with frightening regularity, causing her anxiety and fear. It seemed that some unknown person was trying to intimidate her, penetrating deeper into her everyday life. Julie understood that the stalker was somewhere nearby. One day, she found that someone had moved all the garden furniture. Mark claimed that he had not done it. The most terrifying moment came when she walked out onto the porch one morning and saw a suspicious car parked across the road. As soon as she looked at it, the car took off and sped away. This experience frightened her and led her to develop paranoia. This behavior was repeated multiple times. Julie contacted the police, but in the small provincial area where they lived, there were not enough officers to fully address her problem. According to regulations in such situations, the case should have been transferred to a larger department specializing in harassment, but for some unknown reason, this did not happen. Probably, the authorities simply did not take her problem seriously. Frustrated, Mark decided to take the case into his own hands. Julie began to keep a journal in which she documented each incident in detail. This went on for several years. Finally, she approached the police with her journal and shared a story that had been kept quiet until then because it involved a very shameful episode. According to Julie, in 1991, she had a brief affair with an old colleague, name is Perry Tarika. They had a lot in common. He was going through a divorce at the time, and Julie was experiencing difficulties in her marriage, feeling distanced from Mark, whom she regarded more as a father figure. This distance led her to seek an outlet in a new relationship. The affair began as a friendship that developed into light flirting. One evening in 1991, Julie invited Perry over for dinner while Mark was on a business trip. After dinner, she offered him to stay the night. However, instead of the relief she expected, she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, so much so that it suffocated her. Around this time, the harassment began. Julie also started visiting a psychologist, as she felt she was developing depression. She remembered that her mother had suffered from this illness and ultimately sank into alcoholism, so she wanted to avoid repeating that fate. The doctor diagnosed her with postpartum depression and prescribed antidepressants. After her visit to the doctor, she attempted to lift the burden of guilt by confessing her infidelity to Mark. Unfortunately, this did not help and only worsened the situation, leading Julie to file for divorce. Despite this, both spouses still hoped to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. They even consulted a counselor, and Julie eventually withdrew her divorce application. Another problem remained: the stalking continued. Julie was convinced that this was the same Perry seeking revenge for their breakup. The detectives listened attentively to Julie's story. They accepted her application and promised to start an investigation. Contrary to Mark and Julie's expectations, however, the case never progressed. They decided to take matters into their own hands and hired a private detective, who quickly provided some interesting information. First of all, the detective discovered that Perry had moved to North Carolina during this period, almost 10 hours away from Wisconsin. Given how often the stalker appeared in Wisconsin, it seemed impossible for Perry to influence Julie while leading a normal life and working constantly. When he learned of the stalking, he even wrote her a letter expressing concern for her safety. Unfortunately, Julie didn't believe it. She still was convinced that the stalker was Perry. When she received the letter, she did not reply but instead took it to the police. Despite the detective's skepticism about Perry being the stalker, Julie and Mark continued to suspect him, especially after Perry learned about the stalking. The number of adult photos increased, and Mark became a victim of harassment multiple times. He also began to receive adult photos, which appeared everywhere he went, at his office, in his car, and even in a park. This had a very irritating effect on him, particularly because of the content of the images. Various photos depicted a man and a woman having intimate, but their faces were obscured. Mark endured this for a long time but eventually began to suspect the images might be of his wife. When he confronted Julie about this, they had a serious discussion. Despite her depressed state and overwhelming guilt, Julie insisted that the images were not hers. However, she began to believe that these photos might have been taken by Perry during a night they spent together. As a result, they turned to a private detective once again, determined to catch and punish the obsessive stalker. At that point, Mark figured out that these images most frequently appeared on Friday afternoons. He suggested setting up an ambush where the private detective could hide and watch for the stalker. Unfortunately, the plan failed as the stalker did not show up, seemingly aware of their scheme. The detective then decided to check Mark and Julie's phones. A tracking device was installed with the expectation that the couple would receive a silent call, allowing them to trace its origin. Amazingly, the calls stopped as soon as they set this up, leaving them perplexed. Concerned, they checked their home for wiretaps, but the detective found nothing. Julie financed this operation for several months and spent a great deal of money, but none of the tricks to catch the attacker were successful. The stalker disappeared, and they eventually relinquished the services of the private detective. Amid this turmoil, Julie's depressive state only worsened. She felt that because of her affair, her marriage could fall apart again. This cycle of anxiety and depression continued until December 1998. Julie was still struggling with her mental health when her prescription medication ran out, and she stopped taking the prescribed drugs. Around this time, she noticed a decline in her physical health. She felt weak, could barely walk and talk. She had difficulty thinking. The doctor prescribed her old antidepressants again and discussed her life problems. Even then, she still cried sporadically and felt guilty about her infidelity. Her depressive state lingered. But at least there was some relief in that the harassment had stopped. Everything they had done seemed to work. When the home phone was wiretapped, the calls ceased, and since the fall of 1998, she had not received any adult photographs. However, during this same period, Julie noticed some unpleasant changes. Beginning in August of that year, Mark started to treat her much colder. They had always spent a lot of time together, walking with their children, but now he increasingly made unpleasant comments towards her. It seemed that Mark was simply dissatisfied with everything, and he was not shy about expressing his discontent. Even in front of strangers, he exhibited behavior that overwhelmed his spouse. It was a bit strange. After 7 years of incessant persecution, Julie could finally engage fully in restoring the relationship. However, she felt more unhappy than ever. She told the therapist about her feelings during her appointment. At this time she felt physically unwell, thinking she might be catching a cold from the children. 2 days later, on December 3, 1998, Mark took the children to school and returned home, where he found 40-year-old Julie in bed. She was lying under the blanket on her stomach, appearing as if she were sleeping. Her husband assumed she was not feeling well again due to depression and left her alone for a while. However, he experienced anxiety, so he later decided to check on her and noticed that she was not breathing. Mark confirmed his suspicions and immediately contacted the 911 emergency service. When the police arrived at Jensen House, Mark was visibly upset. He cried as he led everyone into the bedroom, where Julie lay under the blanket, unconscious. He believed she was dead, and after some time, it was impossible to resuscitate her. No wounds were found on her body. There were no signs of a struggle. There were no weapons or drugs nearby that could have been used to poison herself. It appeared her death was due to natural causes. Mark told the police that his wife had been unwell for several days prior. During this period, she had taken sleeping pills to fall asleep, rarely getting out of bed or even speaking. One arm was unnaturally bent beneath her body, suggesting that she could not have fallen asleep in such a position, leading to questions about why her husband left her in that state. In addition, Mark mentioned that she had recently resumed taking antidepressants prescribed by her doctor. He noted that several bottles were on the table, but they remained full. According to Mark, several of these drugs were new to Julie. He believed her illness and death were a result of a conflict between medications. He claimed that, in recent months, Julie had been struggling with a particularly severe stage of depression and, ultimately, could not cope, leading to suicide. However, there was no suicide note or anything similar in the bedroom, which seemed strange. Julie would not have ignored her sons and loved ones without leaving a farewell message. Mark willingly cooperated with the police, granting permission to search the house and the surrounding area. It was clear that Mark was very upset and simply wanted to understand what had happened. Soon, Mark's father arrived at the house, and the two men spoke alone. When they went outside, they were met by a crowd of locals who had gathered due to the commotion. Mark boldly declared that Julie died due to the incompatibility of the medications she had been actively taking lately. It seemed he was trying to calm the crowd, but the statement was too bold, as the investigation had just begun and any assumption needed to be proven or disproved, especially since no autopsy had been performed yet. Such confidence could arouse suspicion from the police. Immediately following these events, the relationship between Mark and Julie's family deteriorated. The reason was that Julie wanted to be buried with her relatives, but her husband insisted that her body, once examined, be cremated. Then they approached Mark with a request to arrange a memorial evening so that everyone who wished could say goodbye to Julie and share a portion of her ashes, but he simply refused to engage. There was much speculation about what happened to the ashes. Mark avoided the topic but later admitted that his son David scattered the ashes over the lake. This caused discontent among Julie's relatives and appeared questionable. When the toxicology report arrived, everything became even more confusing. In fact, Julie had not overdosed on any dangerous drugs. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found only one strange thing: Julie's facial bones looked somewhat deformed, as if they were not broken but on the verge of cracking. The medical examiner had never encountered anything like this before and could not confirm what it could be, but it all seemed suspicious. More valuable information emerged from their computer. It was discovered that Mark was the primary user. There were emails he had sent to one of his colleagues named Kelly Labonte. The letters turned out to be very personal, at times even intimate. Kelly was an assistant to management in the company, but in another city. It turned out that Mark had visited that city a couple of times for work from the middle of the summer, where he met Kelly. Kelly had just gotten married before meeting Mark, but that did not stop her from starting to date another man behind her spouse's back. Interestingly, the incident began in August, coinciding with the time Julie stopped receiving the adult photos, which was also when Mark seemed to be cold towards Julie. All this did not seem like a simple coincidence. In the browser history, there were more disturbing searches. Mark regularly made various requests concerning drugs and dangerous poisons, showing particular interest in antifreeze. The danger of antifreeze is that it is widely available, and even a relatively small dose can be fatal. Another problem is that it does not produce specific symptoms. It makes the person feel unwell, while they are actually being poisoned and gradually dying. Upon discovering the suspicious interest in Mark, a decision was made to test Julie's preserved blood sample for antifreeze. The detectives conducted a specialized analysis and were able to find small traces of the substance, but only traces. They considered this a very important finding. If Julie had wanted to voluntarily leave this life, she would have obviously consumed a larger quantity of antifreeze so that the result would indicate a 100% lethal dose, which would have killed her immediately. The fact that there were only small traces of antifreeze indicated that she may have been methodically poisoned over a long period. Additionally, the substance was not found in the bedroom or anywhere else in the house, suggesting that the victim could not have ingested it by accident. A computer scan revealed that on the morning of her death, Mark had made alarming searches regarding antifreeze. After he read the information, he immediately cleared the search history, apparently trying to cover his tracks. However, he likely was not aware that this could be recovered. All suspicions fell on Mark, especially since his wife was bedridden due to severe depression and their children were too young to use the computer on their own. There was only one person left who could have made those troubling requests. When communicating with the police, Mark stated that on December 3rd, the day Julie died, he had a strong desire to call an ambulance due to his wife's condition, but Julie insisted that he not do so. He interpreted this as a direct order, believing her desire to part with life was voluntary. Mark underestimated the situation, choosing to listen to his wife. Results from several examinations established that the cause of death for Julie was not straightforward. Upon detailed investigation, it was revealed that her nose had become so deformed it was almost broken, likely indicating that Mark had used a pillow to suffocate her by pressing it against her face until she could no longer breathe. Unfortunately, there was no material evidence directly linking him to the murder. Everything remained as mere speculation supported by circumstantial evidence. Suddenly, a friend of Julie brought a letter to the police station that Julie had written and given to her a few days before her death. In this letter, Julie stated that if anything happened to her, her husband should be blamed. It served as a detailed account of their troubled marriage. She expressed regret for a short affair with a man named Perry and proudly stated that she did not become an alcoholic like her mother, despite Mark's attempts to influence her. Julie detailed the medications she was taking and emphasized that she would never take her own life, especially for her children, whom she loved more than anything in the world. Her friend mentioned that Julie had previously voiced her suspicion that her husband wanted to kill her, and she had suggested going to a women's shelter. Although Julie considered this option seriously to protect herself and her children, she ultimately decided against it, fearing that Mark would find her, try to take the boys away. During this period, Julie communicated multiple times, even with acquaintances. She willingly shared her story, seemingly spreading information deliberately so that, if something happened to her, the police would have clear indications of the culprit, her husband. When speaking with Mark, the detectives did not reveal that they had information regarding his affair. So he lied, claiming that Kelly was merely a colleague. However, under pressure, he quickly admitted that he had met with her several times. Curiously, just a few days after Julie's death, Kelly left her husband and moved in with Mark. He fully financed her, supported her. Against this backdrop, Mark's lie seemed strange. The detectives continued to question the main suspect, but he denied almost everything. Finally, after hours of interrogation, Mark confessed, not to murder but to something else. According to him, although he was not the initial pursuer of Julie, and this suspicious man quickly backed off. Mark had kept numerous adult photos he had collected during that period. When he disapproved of his wife's actions, he staged a persecution to make her feel guilty and ashamed. He claimed he never intended to bring her to a tragic end. After 4 hours of interrogation, the police had no grounds for arrest, so they simply let Mark go. Several months passed. The newly minted couple, Kelly and Mark, continued living together. Mark launched a successful construction business. In March 2002, he proposed to Kelly, who accepted. They even placed an engagement announcement in the newspaper. More than a year had passed since Julie's death, and the investigation remained ongoing. However, the authorities were never able to find any direct evidence against the main suspect, Mark Jensen, who was arrested only in March 2002 on suspicion of first-degree murder. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and post bail of $500,000. After that, he was released and returned to his normal life while the police continued to look for new evidence to send him to jail. Contrary to the expectations of Julie's family, this led to the charges being dropped. The children were small when their mother died, and by this time, they had even begun to call Mark's new wife his mom. The boys were in school, and Kelly became pregnant. After this, it seemed that Julie was simply forgotten. Her case became another unsolved mystery. Unexpectedly, 8 years after Julie's death, a new witness emerged, Ed Klug, who had worked with Mark about a month before Julie's death. They attended a business conference, got to talking, and later went to a bar for drinks. There, Mark drank too much and, overwhelmed with emotions, admitted that his marriage was not as good as he wanted it to be. He even said that he hated Julie and wanted her dead. Mark confided that you could poison your spouse with Benadryl, pool chemicals, or ethylene glycol. Based on this testimony, the police had the opportunity to arrest Mark again. This time, bail was set at $2 million. Although Mark's accounts contained more than $1 million, he did not have enough money to post bail and remained behind bars until January 2008 when the trial began. According to toxicological examinations, it was determined that Julie had undergone 3 stages of antifreeze poisoning. Mark had searched for information online many times, including on the very day his wife died. According to the prosecutor's office, he was never able to forgive Julie for her betrayal despite her repentance. He tormented her for a long time and enjoyed her suffering. He decided to finally get rid of her when his affair with Kelly began. Mark's defense attorney insisted that Julie drank the antifreeze herself to voluntarily end her life, claiming that the note she wrote before her death was designed to frame him, whom she had hated for many years. The hearings lasted 7 weeks, after which the jury needed days to decide on the outcome of the trial. Mark Jensen was found guilty of first-degree murder. He burst into tears when sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer immediately began fighting for his freedom by filing appeals, which worked. A federal judge overturned the conviction and ordered his release from prison. Agreeing with the lawyer's argument that the prosecutor's use of his late wife's words violated his constitutional, as his wife could not testify due to her death. The last trial began in January 2023. The defense successfully ensured that the note given to the police by the victim's friend was not used as evidence of guilt, which was a significant blow to the prosecution, as much of their case was built around it. Mark clearly tried to justify himself in every way possible and even became a victim of fraud during this process. His cellmate offered to testify for $1,000. Mark confided in one of his cellmates about his troubled marriage. He admitted to initially giving his wife antifreeze and described how he ultimately forced her to drink it for the last time on December 3, 1998. He went to bed with his wife. Julie Jensen was suffocating. He just lay there and watched her suffer. He then calmly took the children to school but was outraged that Julie never died while he was away, so he took a pillow, turned her onto her back, which caused her hand to assume an unnatural position, pressed the pillow against her face, nearly breaking her facial bones. According to his cellmate, Mark had been poisoning his wife by administering antifreeze in small doses over time. Even Kelly testified against him at the retrial. She was no longer the wife of the killer, having divorced about a year after his arrest, but she raised his 3 children. Interestingly, it became clear who had been persecuting Julie all those years: her husband. He had found out about her betrayal from the beginning and wanted to torture her, relishing in her suffering. Investigators found a fake email with explicit photos of other people that Mark had sent to himself while changing the sender's name to create the impression that someone else had sent it. This sophisticated, long-term torture was calculated, and he even skillfully portrayed himself as a victim. On April 14, 2023, Mark was again sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Thad Reynolds. On the morning of Monday, July 5, 2004, when it was still dark at the Frito-Lay distribution center, which was located in one of the suburbs of Georgia, USA, a courier was preparing to load his car with parcels to start his usual work shift. As he approached the offices, he noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar man was quickly moving across the parking lot. The man looked around warily. Typically, employees arrived much later, with only a few workaholics showing up early. Initially, the courier did not think much of it, until he became an unwitting witness to even more suspicious behavior. As soon as this unfamiliar man approached a mini-van parked inconspicuously, he took off his shirt and threw it in the trunk, after which he changed it while looking around. The stranger then got behind the wheel and drove away, oblivious to the courier watching him. Concerned by the man's behavior, the The courier approached the spot where the car had been parked and noticed blood on the asphalt. Everything seemed increasingly suspicious. When the witness entered the office to see what was going on inside, he found the general manager of the distribution center, Thad Reynolds, unconscious on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Alarmed, the courier immediately called 911. Within minutes, an ambulance crew arrived at the office, but the community was shaken by this event. In the small suburb where many knew each other, such a tragic death seemed unthinkable. This news especially alarmed the parishioners of the local church, who knew Thad Reynolds well as his wife, Michelle. Thad was not only the general manager of the distribution center, but also a volunteer pastor at the Baptist church. The Reynolds seemed like a beautiful and loving couple who had 4 daughters and a happy, established life together. Thad was a devout father and a devout Christian who dedicated his life to his family and helping others. Back in the 80s, Michelle and Thad were ordinary high school students who fell in love. Michelle was a cheerleader who became prom queen, and Thad was a popular, handsome football player with great expectations. It seemed like they was made for each other. They were often referred to as Ken and Barbie. Both were very religious, as were their families. They married in a Baptist church in 1987, right after graduation. The newlyweds started their careers, with Thad working and Michelle as an assistant administrator. They dreamed of a beautiful house, a video camera, and going on a cruise. These goals were achieved quite quickly. In 1992, they welcomed a daughter, which brought significant changes to their lives. At that moment, Michelle became a housewife, wanting to be a loving mother and wife. During this period, she delved into everything necessary to cope with the growing needs of the family. It seemed like everything was going well, but in 1993, a year after the birth of their daughter, Michelle admitted that she wanted a divorce. It seemed that she saw some kind of liberation in this. However, Thad viewed the situation as a real tragedy. During this time, he stopped attending church. As a pastor, Thad struggled with what to do in this situation, but he received strong support from his parishioners, who prayed for him. Even so, Thad and Michelle divorced, and Thad was heartbroken. He could not come to terms with the situation and was persistent in wanting to win back his beloved. At first, she did not agree, and he tried to build relationships with other women but could not forget Michelle. Thad did not give up, and finally, 2 years after the divorce, his efforts bore fruit. Thad thanked the parishioners of the church for their prayers that had been answered. Thad and Michelle remarried in 1997, in the same church. They built a new house near Thad's parents' residence, where they had 3 more daughters. Once again, the Reynolds family appeared to be a loving family. The divorce from a few years prior seemed like just a misunderstanding in a distant memory. During this period, Thad received a promotion at work and became a regional manager at the Frito-Lay distribution center. Thad and Michelle became a model for local families with good income, a nice house, and homeschooled children. Thad's faith grew stronger. He sincerely believed that his prayers were heard by God and was very grateful to the local community. They were sociable and formed a wide circle of acquaintances. Thad and Michelle developed particularly warm relationships with Harper, a volunteer church leader and volunteer family pastor at Hollywood Baptist, who also had a wife named Paige and 3 small daughters. All the members of the families got along well. Thad worked mainly remotely, while Michelle and Paige became best friends, accompanying each other everywhere. Their children were also very friendly. However, the idyllic friendship between the families began to change suddenly in 2004 when Paige noticed that her friend was starting to avoid her and making an effort to maintain distance in every possible way. Paige tried to find out what was going on and talked to Thad. He referenced family issues, which allegedly led to a test of Michelle's character. In fact, Michelle wanted Thad to break off her relationship with her husband, who was increasingly immersed in church affairs, distancing himself from her. However, she understood that he would resist this in every way possible. Additionally, a divorce would jeopardize the pastor's career, which he had long sought. An outlet for him was communication with his congregation. They regularly supported him on the internet. In parallel, the men began to work together at the church, which made their meetings more frequent. The last of them occurred on July 4, 2004. The couples met again at the church, and after the service, they went to a local park to spend time together playing volleyball. Paige noticed that Michelle was more flirtatious with her husband that evening than usual. By the end of the joint vacation, the couples gathered their children and went home. She did even ask her husband not to communicate with Michelle. The next morning, on July 5, 2004, Thad got up early, which was normal for him. He arrived at work much earlier than the other employees, after which he would start his shift. After he walked inside, a burgundy minivan stopped in the parking lot near the offices. A man got out and entered the building. A few minutes later, Thad Reynolds was killed. Soon after, the county police received a call from the distribution center. A witness found a body outside of the offices. The deceased was found to have multiple stab wounds all over his body, including several defensive injuries on his hands. He had desperately tried to defend himself but was unable to resist the armed criminal. The witness, a courier, mentioned that he saw the probable attacker but did not get a good look at his face or the license plate number of the car he drove away in because it was very dark. However, he provided some valuable clues. Evidence found at the scene of the bloody massacre confirmed that the suspect and the person seen by the courier were the same. It soon became obvious that the attacker was injured. His blood was found near the doorway at the entrance to the office and near the car. According to investigators, there was nothing unusual about this, as attackers often cut themselves on the blade when using a knife. This provided detectives with several important clues. Firstly, it was clear that the attacker was an inexperienced criminal since a lot of evidence was left at the scene. Aside from the blood, they found a hunting knife, which became the presumed murder weapon, allowing them to track down its place of purchase. Secondly, in the parking lot next to the minivan, they found custom-made glasses, probably dropped by the criminal while he was changing clothes. Apparently, he was trying to escape from the crime scene as quickly as possible and didn't bother to look for them. Naturally, such an accessory could help in identifying the criminal since they had a custom prescription. Thad's family was notified of what had happened, and his wife was in Thad to identify the deceased. The information spread rapidly throughout the small town. Among the first to learn of the situation was Scott Harper, who immediately got together with his wife and went to support Michelle during this difficult time. Imagine Paige's surprise when she saw that there were no signs of panic or tears of frustration from Michelle, which were typically expected from a grieving widow. Instead, she appeared distant and a bit embarrassed. Thad's loved ones also immediately noticed this strange behavior. Law enforcement officers began working at the crime scene from the first moments. The forensic examination quickly indicated that this attack could not have been random in nature. The only thing that seemed clear was that it had a personal motive. However, the money from the cash register remained untouched. Nothing was taken from Thad, not even his wallet, car keys, or mobile phone, all of which were left in their place. This means the stranger came to the office solely to commit murder. Additionally, the choice of weapon further supported these assumptions, as cruelty and the use of a knife imply close contact. It is likely that the criminal hated his victim and had a personal motive for such a brutal attack. On the evening of the same day, news channels reported that local residents should be aware of a possible threat. The police sought information and attempted to find witnesses who could provide valuable clues. The local community supported several appeals to the police station, but nothing new emerged from the collected evidence. From the outset, detectives paid particular attention to Scott, who was close to the victims like no one else. Yet, none of the community members could believe Scott was capable of such an act, especially given that the relationships between the families seemed very friendly, resembling a model friendship free of hatred or malice. However, the evidence all pointed toward him. He drove a burgundy minivan, which was identical to the killer's vehicle, according to the main witness. Scott was promptly asked to come to the station and provide a statement. The reasons to pay attention to Scott turned out to be more than sufficient. It was revealed that another witness, who worked part-time installing, repairing telephone lines, had accidentally overheard a conversation between Scott and a woman, clearly not his wife, weeks before the crime. In that conversation, Scott even called her by name, Michelle. They flirted so openly that it was reminiscent of young lovers. Furthermore, Scott wore custom-made glasses, as everyone knew he had severe vision problems, making the accessory significant in identifying the criminal. They clearly had a motive to get rid of Thad, who was an obstacle to their happiness. Gradually, Scott Harper's wife began to notice unusual moments in his behavior. When reasonable suspicions arose, she became even more attentive. Firstly, Paige could not find her husband's glasses, which he always wore. Secondly, there were some bruises and scratches under his eyes from the glasses. In addition, there were bandages on his index and middle fingers, which he attributed to an injury received in the gym. The only thing missing was material evidence confirming Scott's involvement. The detectives expect Thad to find bloody clothes belonging to the killer, but it was all in vain. The search of Harper's house yielded no results. On Wednesday, July 7th, Scott was being interrogated at the police station. He attributed his injured hand to an accident at the gym, where he had crushed his fingers. Scott denied having had an affair with Michelle, also stated that he had lost his glasses and could not provide them to the detectives despite all persistent requests. He allegedly did not even have a doctor's prescription for their manufacture. Paige began to grow suspicious of her husband, but he stubbornly remained silent. According to Paige, he had been behaving strangely since Monday morning. Despite a whole list of circumstantial evidence, Scott was released from the police station. Naturally, this did not mean that the investigators took him at his word. It just took time to obtain warrants and gather more incriminating evidence. There were more inconsistencies. In particular, on the morning of the murder, he had sent Michelle a message in which he asked her to stop him if there was any doubt. She ordered him to act. These words sounded suspicious. It was believed that he was coordinating with his mistress. The detectives were in no hurry to bring Michelle in for questioning so as not to traumatize or scare her off. First, they wanted Thad to gather even more information, which led the detectives to Scott's workplace. The primary task was to check his computer. However, the correspondence had been deleted. Fortunately, a significant part of it was easily restored, which became a valuable source of information. The records showed that most of the messages from Scott were sent to Michelle Reynolds. He used his work computer to hide the correspondence from his wife. It all started as a routine discussion concerning the church youth group, but later the communication became increasingly personal. About a month before Thad's death, they began exchanging intimate letters regularly. They entered into a romantic relationship and planned to be together. Scott intended to leave his wife and move Michelle to Portland. While there were many ambiguous texts, there were no specific indications of malicious plans, making the situation complicated. On the day when Paige noticed that Michelle was somehow avoiding her, she was actually with Scott. This occurred during a trip related to church activities, but it did not prevent them from having sinful thoughts. The content of the letters revealed that Michelle desperately wants to break up with her husband, but Thad denied the very possibility of divorce. He was ready to do anything to keep his beautiful wife close to him, but it cost him his life. Detectives believe that, against this backdrop, Michelle realized that there was only one way to get out of this relationship: her husband's death. She did not want to shed blood with her own hands, so she sought the help of her lover. Clearly, both experienced intense feelings for each other. In search of evidence, investigators checked Scott's browser history. It turned out that he was looking for information suggesting that he wanted Thad not only to get rid of his mistress's husband but also to remain unpunished. The police eventually managed to uncover one of the key emails in which they planned the attack, intending to enter through the window when there would be fewer patrols on the streets, thereby increasing the chances of going unnoticed. Michelle played an active role in this plan, coordinating the actions when Thad left for work early on Monday morning. She immediately called her lover to order the attack. Even despite the veiled phrases and coded messages, it was obvious that early in the morning of July 5, 2004, the tragic was meant to happen. By this point, the police had gathered enough damning evidence against Michelle and Scott. The first to be arrested was Scott Harper, who was charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. Detectives hoped that he would inevitably turn on Michelle, but instead, His feelings appeared to be stronger than they expect, as he exercised his right to remain silent immediately after the arrest and refused to cooperate. However, Scott's confirmation was not necessary, as his work computer provided enough circumstantial evidence to also charge Michelle. She was arrested the same day following Scott's arrest. The detectives detained her while she was leaving her lawyer's office in the city center. She immediately refused to speak, citing her rights. When the parishioners of the church where Thad served found out that his wife and his best friend had conspired against him, everyone was shocked. They all remembered how Thad had asked everyone to pray for his wife during his life and had wished for her return after the divorce, completely unaware of the betrayal that had taken place. This could end in a bloody massacre at the hands of those closest to him. Sheath of a hunting knife was found right in Thad's office, led them to track it down to the moment of purchase in the store. Judging by the recordings from the surveillance cameras, it was Scott bought it, but now the murder weapon was missing. It was believed that the killer managed to dispose of it. Crime scene investigation results are available. The drops of blood at the crime scene turned out to be Scott's blood. Suddenly, the situation changed on July 13th when one of Scott's colleagues from the medical center where he worked contacted the police station. One of the IT department employees, who was concerned about Thad Reynolds' fate, decided to conduct his own investigation. He knew the layout of the buildings and the places where something could be carefully hidden. The object was small, and he immediately thought it was worth checking the niches under the floor through which communications and wires were laid to the office. Naturally, Scott knew about them, as he had worked in this department. To his surprise, the colleague found both the knife and bloody clothing, which he immediately reported to the police. On November 17, 2004, the preliminary stage of the hearings began, during which the order of the criminals' trials was evaluated. It was obvious that Michelle had a much better chance of avoiding imprisonment, as there was very weak evidence against her. All of it was indirect. In contrast, the evidence against Scott looked much more compelling, including the murder weapon and the bloody knife. The prosecutor believed that Scott had no chance of going unpunished, while new valuable details could come to light during the trial of the criminals. The police also found video recordings from the stores that Scott had visited, located a salesperson who remembered the man who had bought the hunting knife. A prescription from Scott's eye doctor also appeared at the crime scene. As expected, it matched the glasses found there. At the November hearing, the district attorney announced that he would seek the death penalty for both defendants. This was a clever move, as there was nothing significant against Michelle so far. The authorities hoped that Scott would be able to rectify this situation, realizing that he had nothing left to lose. It was assumed that the man would be offered a deal, which would be his only chance to avoid capital punishment. They believed that he was weak in spirit, otherwise, he would not have succumbed to the charms of Michelle, a seductress and manipulator. However, they were wrong. Scott did not give in, even under pressure from his lawyer, who believed that this was the only way to save his life. Even behind prison bars, Scott and Michelle continued to correspond. Michelle used excerpts from the Bible, highlighting certain words, while Scott composed real sentences that law enforcement officers could read. But these notes could not convince the jury, which would have been difficult. They continued to play their spy game, and they had plenty of time. Cases involving capital punishment traditionally turn into lengthy legal maneuvering on the part of the lawyers. All this dragged on for months and even years. Scott turned out to be a very persistent man and held out until the fall of 2008. After 4 years spent in prison, he finally agreed to cooperate with the police. However, even now, concerns about his mistress occupied the main place in his thoughts. Scott agreed to confess in exchange for a life sentence and also demanded that the death penalty never be used against Michelle. The deal was approved on October 1, 2008. Scott admitted his guilt. According to him, the day before the attack, Michelle had once again told him that they could not be together while Thad was alive. She had been turning her lover, Scott, against her husband for a long time, and in parallel, she was poisoning Thad with more harmful food that would kill him faster. Pressure was the last drop. Right after that, Scott went to a camping equipment store where he bought a hunting knife. That same day, he had to deal with Thad, who usually stayed in the office later than everyone else. Scott and Michelle even went to a restaurant together, where he confessed to his failure, and then they planned the attack for the next morning. They kissed in the parking lot of the car like teenagers. When Scott arrived at Thad's office with a knife in his hands, he told Thad, "I want the same as you," and then attacked his friend. Interestingly, until this point, Michelle had never provided any testimony. By exercising her right to remain silent, her statements could be interpreted from different angles, making the trial against her a rather risky endeavor. In particular, her correspondents never directly addressed their intentions. Using encryption and veiled propositions, it was almost impossible to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. During her 6 years in prison, Michelle Reynolds changed significantly and became unrecognizable. When she spoke to the police, however, her responses were still veiled offers. Michelle avoided direct answers, stating that she felt guilty because she had an affair that led to her husband's death. Of course, this did not satisfy Thad's mother, who simply wanted Thad to know why he had to die. Michelle had no answer. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison in January 2010. Richard Scott Harper pleaded guilty to murder and received a life sentence without parole. This tragedy left a bloody mark not only on the lives of two families but also on the congregation. The death of the pastor, who was so cruelly murdered at the behest of his wife, was one of the most disturbing and painful events for them. Now, regarding the repose of Thad's soul, this situation caused mixed feelings. Everyone remembered how they had prayed for the Reynolds to be together, but now they could not discern whether this was divine providence or a devilish joke.